Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Michigan State Trooper Michael Thompson had patrolled the E-75 corridor between Bay City and Saginaw for 14 years, witnessing everything from routine fender benders to multi-vehicle pileups that made national news. But nothing in his extensive experience had prepared him for the series of events that would begin on a bone-chilling January night in 2019, when the temperature hovered at -8 degrees Fahrenheit and wind gusts created conditions so severe that the National Weather Service had issued warnings urging all non-essential travel to cease immediately. At precisely 2:47 a.m. on January 15th, Thompson's radio crackled to life with a dispatch call that initially seemed routine. An abandoned vehicle on the southbound shoulder of E-75, approximately 3 miles north of exit 162. The wind chill factor had plummeted to nearly -30 degrees, creating conditions where exposed skin could suffer frostbite within minutes. Most sensible motorists had heeded the weather warnings and remained safely indoors, but Thompson and his fellow troopers continued their patrols, knowing that someone's life might depend on their presence during these dangerous conditions. Thompson's specially equipped Ford Explorer, designed specifically for Michigan's brutal winters, cut through the swirling snow as he responded to the call. The vehicle's advanced traction control system and studded tires provided the grip necessary to navigate the treacherous road surface safely, while the heated interior protected him from the life-threatening cold outside. His dashboard-mounted camera automatically began recording as he approached the scene, a standard protocol that would later prove absolutely crucial to the investigation that followed. The abandoned vehicle was a late-model Honda Accord with Minnesota plates, positioned on the shoulder with its hazard lights still blinking weakly against the Arctic conditions. As Thompson conducted his initial walkthrough, several details immediately struck him as highly unusual and deeply troubling. The car's engine was still warm to the touch, suggesting it had been running within the past hour, yet the keys were completely missing from the ignition. The driver's door stood slightly ajar, allowing the brutal cold to penetrate the vehicle's interior, but there were no signs of struggle, violence, or any indication that the driver had been forced to abandon the vehicle under duress. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47, Thompson radioed, his breath creating visible clouds in the frigid air despite the protection of his winter gear. "I'm at the scene of the abandoned vehicle. This is a 2017 Honda Accord, Minnesota license plate Charlie Delta 7492. Vehicle appears to have been recently occupied, but the driver is nowhere to be seen. Requesting a vehicle registration check and any available information about the registered owner." The response came back within minutes, delivered by dispatcher Amanda Foster, a 20-year veteran whose calm professionalism had guided officers through countless emergencies. "Unit 47. Vehicle is registered to Dakota Smith. White male, age 28, residence listed as Minneapolis, Minnesota. Subject is employed as a pharmaceutical sales representative with Medicor Solutions. No outstanding warrants, no history of mental health issues or prior missing persons reports. Vehicle registration is current, no liens or other complications noted." Thompson's training immediately kicked in as he began documenting the scene with methodical precision. His flashlight beam revealed that the vehicle's gas tank registered 3/4 full, completely ruling out the possibility that Smith had simply run out of fuel and walked to seek assistance. The car's trunk contained a neatly organized array of pharmaceutical samples and sales materials, along with a weekend bag that suggested Smith had been traveling for business purposes. Personal items including a cell phone charger, unopened bottles of water, and energy bars indicated that this had been a planned trip rather than an emergency situation. What troubled Thompson most deeply was the complete absence of footprints in the snow around the vehicle. The shoulder of I-75 at this particular location consisted of graded gravel that accumulated snow throughout the winter months, creating a surface that would clearly show any human activity. Despite the continuing snowfall, which hadn't been heavy enough to completely obscure recent tracks, Thompson should have been able to identify at least partial impressions if someone had exited the vehicle and walked away. Instead, the snow around the Honda appeared completely undisturbed, as if Dakota Smith had simply vanished from behind the steering wheel without ever opening the door. Thompson spent nearly an hour documenting every aspect of the scene, photographing the vehicle from multiple angles, checking for any signs of mechanical failure that might explain the abandonment, and searching the immediate area for any clues about Smith's whereabouts. The car's interior revealed no signs of struggle. The seat was properly adjusted for someone of Smith's height. The mirrors were positioned correctly, and personal belongings were arranged as they would be during normal travel. The temperature continued to drop as Thompson completed his initial investigation, and he knew that if Smith was somewhere out in these conditions without proper shelter, survival time would be measured in minutes rather than hours. He requested a tow truck for the abandoned vehicle and filed his initial report as a missing person case with circumstances pending further investigation. Standard protocol required him to check local hospitals, contact Smith's emergency contacts, and coordinate with the Minnesota State Patrol to determine if Smith had any history of similar incidents or mental health issues that might explain a voluntary disappearance. As the tow truck arrived and began the process of removing Smith's vehicle from the dangerous highway shoulder, Thompson made detailed notes about the exact location, weather conditions, and every observation he had made during his investigation. His report noted the unusual absence of footprints, the missing keys, and the fact that Smith appeared to have vanished without taking any of his personal belongings, including his wallet, which contained several $100s in cash and all his identification. The investigation might have proceeded along predictable lines, with Smith eventually classified as a voluntary missing person who had chosen to abandon his vehicle and disappear for personal reasons, if not for what happened exactly 7 days later under eerily similar circumstances that would force Thompson to confront the possibility that something far more sinister was occurring along his patrol route. Exactly 1 week after Dakota Smith's disappearance, on January 22, 2019, at 3:15 a.m., Thompson found himself responding to what initially appeared to be an identical situation. Another abandoned vehicle call on I-75, this time approximately 2 miles south of the previous incident's location. The weather conditions were remarkably similar, with temperatures below zero and intermittent snow squalls creating hazardous driving conditions that had once again prompted official warnings against unnecessary travel. The second vehicle was a Toyota Camry with Ohio plates, registered to Austin Hayes, a 31-year-old insurance adjuster from Cincinnati. Like Dakota Smith's Honda from the previous week, the Camry showed absolutely no signs of mechanical failure, contained adequate fuel, and had been abandoned with its hazard lights blinking steadily in the darkness. Hayes's briefcase remained in the back seat, containing files related to insurance claims he had been investigating in the Saginaw area, along with a thermos of coffee that Thompson's infrared thermometer indicated had been poured approximately 2 hours earlier. The similarities to the Smith case were so striking that Thompson immediately felt a chill that had nothing to do with the sub-freezing temperature. Once again, despite fresh snow that had fallen throughout the evening, no footprints were visible around the abandoned vehicle. Thompson found the driver's door unlocked and slightly open, with the keys missing from the ignition, just as they had been in Smith's case. The scene was so nearly identical that Thompson immediately contacted his supervisor before proceeding with the standard investigation protocols. Sergeant Jennifer Collins arrived on scene at 4:20 a.m., bringing with her 15 years of experience in highway patrol investigations and a reputation for thoroughness that had earned her the respect of officers throughout the district. Collins had been Thompson's supervisor for 3 years and had come to trust his instincts and attention to detail, so when he expressed concern about the similarities between this case and the Smith disappearance, she took his observation seriously. After conducting her own methodical examination of Hayes's vehicle, Collins confirmed Thompson's assessment that the circumstances surrounding this disappearance were remarkably similar to those involving Dakota Smith. The positioning of the vehicle, the missing keys, the absence of footprints, and the lack of any signs of struggle or mechanical failure all pointed to a pattern that neither officer could easily explain through conventional reasoning. "Mike," Collins said, her voice carrying the weight of growing concern as she completed her walkthrough of the scene. "I want you to pull all the incident reports for abandoned vehicles along this stretch of I-75 going back at least 6 months. Include anything within a 20-mile radius of these 2 locations. I have a feeling we might be looking at something more systematic than 2 isolated incidents." The record search that Thompson conducted over the following 3 days revealed a pattern that sent shockwaves through the Michigan State Police hierarchy and would eventually attract the attention of federal law enforcement agencies. Between August 2018 and the present, no fewer than 7 vehicles had been reported abandoned along a 12-mile stretch of E75 between exit 160 and exit 172. All under circumstances that shared disturbing similarities with the Smith and Hayes cases. Each incident had occurred during harsh weather conditions, severe snowstorms, heavy rain with near-zero visibility, or dense fog that significantly reduced visibility and limited the number of potential witnesses on the highway. The abandoned vehicles had all been found with hazard lights operating, doors unlocked, keys missing, and no signs of struggle or mechanical failure. Most troubling of all, in every single case, no evidence existed that the drivers had ever actually exited their vehicles. The pattern became even more disturbing when Thompson cross-referenced the dates and times of the incidents. Each disappearance had occurred during overnight hours, typically between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., when traffic on I-75 was at its lightest. The weather conditions during each incident had been severe enough to provide natural concealment for any suspicious activity, as if someone was deliberately timing these events to occur when natural conditions would provide maximum protection from observation. Thompson's investigation also revealed troubling similarities in the profiles of the missing individuals. All were professional men between the ages of 25 and 40. All had been traveling alone on business-related trips, and all had been driving rental cars or personal vehicles that wouldn't immediately be missed by family members who expected them to be away from home. The targeting appeared to be deliberate and sophisticated, suggesting that these were not random opportunistic crimes, but rather carefully planned predatory acts. The discovery of this pattern prompted an immediate escalation of the investigation. Collins contacted the FBI's Detroit Field Office, the Michigan State Police Criminal Investigation Division, and county sheriff departments from all affected jurisdictions. Within 48 hours, what had begun as routine missing persons investigations had evolved into a multi-agency task force focused on what appeared to be serial predation along one of Michigan's busiest interstate corridors. The realization that a predator had been systematically targeting travelers along Interstate 75 for months without detection sent a chill through law enforcement agencies throughout the region. The sophistication required to carry out such crimes while avoiding detection suggested they were dealing with someone who possessed detailed knowledge of law enforcement procedures, weather patterns, and the vulnerabilities of interstate highway systems. The formation of the I-75 Corridor Task Force was announced on February 1, 2019, following an emergency meeting between Michigan State Police leadership, the FBI's Detroit Field Office, and sheriff departments from Bay, Saginaw, and Genesee counties. The task force represented one of the most comprehensive interstate criminal investigation efforts in Michigan's history, bringing together expertise from multiple agencies to confront what appeared to be a sophisticated and methodical predator. Trooper Thompson was designated as the primary investigating officer, a recognition of his role in identifying the pattern and his intimate knowledge of the affected highway corridor. Working alongside him was FBI Special Agent Rebecca Turner, a behavioral analyst with 12 years of experience investigating crimes involving predators who targeted travelers along major highway systems. Agent Turner brought a federal perspective and access to resources that would prove crucial to understanding the full scope of the criminal activity they were confronting. During their first joint briefing at the Michigan State Police headquarters in East Lansing, Agent Turner outlined a preliminary profile based on the available evidence that would guide much of their subsequent investigation. Her analysis painted a disturbing picture of an organized offender who had studied law enforcement procedures, weather patterns, and the psychology of interstate travel to create an almost perfect predatory system. What we're dealing with here, Turner explained to the assembled task force members, is an exceptionally organized predator who has identified this stretch of I-75 as an optimal hunting ground. The timing of these incidents during severe weather suggests not just careful planning, but sophisticated understanding of how weather conditions affect both law enforcement response times and the likelihood of witnesses. The lack of physical evidence points to someone with extensive knowledge of forensic investigation techniques and crime scene management. Turner's analysis continued with observations that would prove prophetic as the investigation developed. Most importantly, the fact that we're not finding bodies strongly suggests that these disappearances serve a purpose beyond simple murder. We need to be prepared for the possibility that we're dealing with human trafficking, forced labor, identity theft, or some other form of extended captivity that requires keeping the victims alive for extended periods. The task force's investigative approach was comprehensive and methodical. Thompson was assigned to coordinate with local businesses along the I-75 corridor, truck stops, gas stations, restaurants, and hotels to identify any witnesses who might have observed suspicious activity during the time frames when the disappearances occurred. This required visiting every commercial establishment within a 50-mile radius of the affected area, a time-consuming process that nevertheless yielded crucial intelligence about the predator's methods. Agent Turner focused on the behavioral analysis and victimology aspects of the investigation, working to understand why these particular individuals had been targeted and what common factors might have made them vulnerable to predation. Her investigation revealed disturbing patterns in how the victims had been selected, suggesting that the predator had been conducting surveillance of potential targets before making contact. The breakthrough in their investigation came from an unexpected source. Hunter Brooks, a long-haul trucker who had been making regular runs between Detroit and Grand Rapids for the past 3 years. Brooks contacted the task force tip line after seeing news reports about the missing persons investigation, explaining that he had witnessed something unusual on multiple occasions while driving the I-75 corridor during nighttime hours in severe weather conditions. "I've seen him at least 3 times now, maybe 4, Brooks told Thompson during their interview at a truck stop near exit 164, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of coffee as he recalled the incidents that had been troubling him for months. Always, during the worst weather, blizzards, ice storms, that kind of thing. Always in the same general area, maybe a 5 or 6 mile stretch of highway. Guy stands on the shoulder wearing what looks like a perfect state police uniform, waves drivers over, like he's conducting some kind of safety checkpoint or emergency assistance. Brooks's description became more detailed as Thompson encouraged him to recall every aspect of what he had observed. First time I saw him, I thought it was completely legitimate. You know how troopers will sometimes set up safety checks during bad weather, making sure people have proper equipment, checking if anyone needs assistance. But something about the way this guy moved, the way he positioned himself relative to the traffic flow, it didn't feel right. Too deliberate, too practiced, if that makes sense. The trucker's observations provided the task force with their first concrete description of a suspect. Brooks described a white male, approximately 6 feet tall, and appearing to be in his 40s, wearing what appeared to be an authentic Michigan State Police winter uniform, complete with reflective vest, campaign hat, and all the appropriate insignia. Most importantly, Brooks had observed this individual operating a vehicle that strongly resembled a police cruiser, but lacked the distinctive markings, light configuration, and equipment of official Michigan State Police patrol units. The car looked right from a distance, Brooks explained, especially in bad weather when visibility is limited. Dark-colored, had what looked like a light bar on top, positioned like a patrol car. But when I got closer one time, something about it seemed off. Couldn't put my finger on exactly what, but it just didn't look quite right. Like someone had put together a really good imitation but missed some of the details. Brooks's willingness to come forward provided the task force with their first concrete lead in what had been a frustratingly elusive investigation. His description of the suspect's methods, using severe weather conditions for concealment, positioning himself to appear as legitimate law enforcement, and operating a convincing replica of a police vehicle, confirmed many of the theories that Turner and Thompson had developed about their predator's sophistication and planning. The revelation that their predator was impersonating a Michigan State trooper added an entirely new dimension to the investigation, and explained many of the puzzling aspects of the disappearances. Agent Turner immediately coordinated with the Michigan Secretary of State's office to identify any individuals who had recently purchased decommissioned police vehicles at state auctions, while Thompson worked with uniform suppliers throughout the region to trace recent purchases of state police-style clothing and equipment. The investigation into the false troopers' equipment and methods revealed the disturbing extent of preparation that had gone into creating this predatory system. Over the past 18 months, 3 different individuals had purchased former police vehicles at state auctions, all paying in cash and providing addresses that subsequent investigation revealed to be completely fictitious. The vehicles included 2 Crown Victoria police interceptors and 1 Chevrolet Tahoe, all of which had been retired from various Michigan law enforcement agencies. Similarly, multiple uniform suppliers reported unusual orders for Michigan State Police-style clothing from buyers who claimed to be involved in security work, theatrical productions, or law enforcement training programs. The orders had been placed using different names and payment methods, but the shipping addresses all traced to mail forwarding services or temporary rental properties, suggesting a systematic effort to avoid creating traceable connections between the purchases and the actual buyer. Most troubling was the discovery that someone had been methodically studying Michigan State Police procedures and protocols with an attention to detail that went far beyond casual observation. Requests to the Michigan State Police Academy revealed that an individual using false credentials had attempted to audit training sessions focused on traffic stop procedures, evidence handling, and emergency response protocols. While the attempt had been detected and prevented by Academy security, it demonstrated the level of preparation and research that their suspect had undertaken. Thompson's investigation of the specific locations where vehicles had been abandoned revealed another layer of sophistication in the predator's planning. Each site had been chosen to offer unique tactical advantages for someone planning to intercept and abduct travelers. Limited visibility from passing traffic due to curves in the highway or elevation changes, minimal lighting that would conceal suspicious activity, and quick access to secondary roads that could facilitate the rapid transportation of victims away from the interstate without detection. The task force established comprehensive 24-hour surveillance of the entire affected corridor, using both marked and unmarked units positioned strategically along the stretch of Interstate 75, where the disappearances had occurred. The surveillance operation, designated Highway Shield, involved coordination between the Michigan State Police, FBI, county sheriff departments, and even the Michigan Department of Transportation, which provided access to highway cameras and traffic monitoring systems. For 3 weeks, the surveillance operation yielded nothing but routine traffic stops, minor accidents, and the usual assortment of incidents that occur along busy interstate corridors. Investigators began to worry that their increased presence had driven the predator away from his established hunting ground, possibly forcing him to relocate his activities to another highway system where he could continue his crimes without the intensive scrutiny now focused on Interstate 75. Then, on February 28, 2019, during a severe ice storm that had reduced visibility to less than 50 feet and created road conditions so hazardous that the Michigan Department of Transportation had issued warnings against all non-essential travel, their carefully laid trap was finally sprung. The confrontation that followed would provide crucial evidence about the predator's methods, while also revealing the true scope of the criminal enterprise they were investigating. At 1:45 a.m., Thompson was positioned in an unmarked Ford Taurus, approximately 1 mile south of exit 162, monitoring radio traffic and maintaining visual contact with other surveillance units through the sophisticated communication system that had been established for the operation. Despite the advanced equipment and careful planning, the severe weather conditions made observation extremely challenging, with swirling snow and ice reducing effective visibility to just a few dozen yards. Through his night vision equipment, Thompson observed what appeared to be a routine traffic stop involving a sedan that had been struggling with the icy road conditions and a police vehicle that had pulled it over on the shoulder. The scene appeared completely normal from a distance, exactly the type of safety assistance that legitimate troopers provided during severe weather events. But something about the positioning of the vehicles and the movements of the uniformed figure triggered Thompson's instincts, honed by years of highway patrol experience and months of intensive study of this particular predator's methods. Following established surveillance protocols, Thompson immediately radioed his position and requested backup while maintaining visual observation of what appeared to be a traffic stop in progress. However, the severe weather conditions meant that the nearest support units were at least 15 minutes away, and Thompson could see that the uniformed figure was approaching the civilian vehicle with an urgency that didn't match standard traffic stop procedures. As Thompson watched through his binoculars and night vision equipment, several details about the scene began to trouble him deeply. The positioning of the supposed police cruiser was wrong, angled in a way that blocked visibility from passing traffic, rather than providing the safety buffer that officers are trained to maintain during roadside stops. The uniformed figure's movements appeared rushed and predatory, rather than following the measured, professional approach that Thompson had been trained to use during legitimate traffic stops. The decision to intervene immediately rather than wait for backup was one that Thompson would later describe as purely instinctual, driven by years of experience that told him something was seriously wrong with the scene he was observing. As he activated his emergency lights and began approaching the location, he observed the uniformed figure suddenly abandon his approach to the civilian vehicle and sprint toward the dense woods that bordered the highway at that particular location. Thompson's intervention came just in time to prevent what would certainly have been another disappearance. The civilian vehicle, a late-model Chrysler 300 with Illinois plates, was found with its driver, Logan Pierce, a 34-year-old marketing executive from Chicago, slumped unconscious behind the wheel, but still alive. Pierce was immediately transported to Bay Regional Medical Center, where emergency room physicians and toxicologists worked to counteract the effects of a powerful sedative that had been administered through what appeared to be a small puncture wound on his hand. The medical team's quick action in treating Pierce's condition provided the investigation with its first living witness to the predator's methods. Toxicology tests revealed the presence of a sophisticated sedative compound that would have rendered Pierce unconscious within minutes, while leaving minimal physical evidence of its administration. The delivery method appeared to involve a specialized injection device designed to penetrate skin with minimal sensation, allowing the predator to drug victims without their immediate awareness. Pierce's statement, provided after he had recovered sufficiently to be interviewed by Thompson and Agent Turner, confirmed many of the theories they had developed about the predator's methods while revealing new details about the sophistication of his deception. Pierce described being flagged down by what appeared to be a completely legitimate Michigan State trooper, who had explained that hazardous road conditions ahead required all southbound traffic to follow a temporary detour route for safety purposes. Everything about him seemed absolutely professional and authentic, Pierce told the investigators during his interview at the hospital. The uniform was perfect. I mean, exactly what you'd expect a state trooper to wear, including all the proper patches, badges, and equipment. He had a radio that was making what sounded like official police transmissions, proper identification, even business cards with the Michigan State Police logo. He approached my vehicle exactly like every other police encounter I've had in my life. Pierce's description of the encounter revealed the predator's psychological manipulation techniques, as well as his technical methods. The false trooper had established rapport by expressing concern for Pierce's safety during the hazardous driving conditions, positioning himself as a protective authority figure whose intervention was designed to help rather than harm. This approach would have naturally overcome any suspicions Pierce might have had about the legitimacy of the stop. He asked to see my driver's license and vehicle registration, which seemed completely normal, Pierce continued. Said he needed to verify that I was properly licensed to drive in these conditions, and that my vehicle was equipped for winter driving. When I handed him my license, he appeared to be examining it carefully, but that's when I felt the sharp pain in my hand. Thought maybe he had a rough edge on his badge or something, but within a couple of minutes I started feeling dizzy and confused. The physical evidence recovered from the scene of Pierce's near abduction provided the task force with their first concrete forensic material related to the predator's activities. Crime scene technicians were able to recover partial tire impressions from the area where the false police vehicle had been positioned, along with several items that had apparently been dropped during the suspect's hasty retreat into the woods when Thompson's intervention disrupted his planned abduction. The physical evidence recovered from the scene of Logan Pierce's near abduction represented a breakthrough that would ultimately lead to the resolution of the entire case. Among the items recovered during the extensive crime scene processing were a modified syringe designed to deliver sedatives through minimal skin contact, several zip tie restraints of a type commonly used by law enforcement, and most importantly, a fragment of a driver's license photograph that appeared to show a middle-aged white male with distinctive facial scarring. FBI forensic imaging specialists worked around the clock to enhance the partial photograph, using advanced digital reconstruction techniques to produce a composite image that could be distributed to law enforcement agencies throughout the Midwest. The enhanced image showed a man appearing to be in his early 40s with angular facial features and a distinctive scar running from his left temple to his jawline, likely the result of a serious accident or violent encounter at some point in his past. Agent Turner coordinated the development of a comprehensive psychological profile based on all the evidence gathered during the investigation up to that point. The profile described an organized offender with extensive knowledge of law enforcement procedures, someone who derived psychological satisfaction from the authority and control represented by a police uniform, and most disturbing, an individual who was likely keeping the missing persons alive for extended periods rather than killing them immediately after their abduction. This isn't someone who kills for the psychological satisfaction of murder, Turner explained to Thompson and the other task force members during one of their daily briefing sessions. The careful planning, the elaborate impersonation, the sophisticated methods, and most importantly, the fact that we're not finding bodies. All of this suggests someone who is using the victims for a specific purpose that requires keeping them alive. We need to be prepared for the possibility that we're dealing with human trafficking, forced labor, identity theft, or some other form of extended captivity. The search for the predator's base of operations became the task force's primary focus, concentrating on rural properties within a 50-mile radius of the E75 corridor that offered the seclusion and facilities necessary for holding multiple individuals captive for extended periods. Thompson worked closely with county assessors' offices, real estate agents, and local law enforcement agencies to identify recently purchased properties, abandoned buildings, and any locations that had been reported as suspicious by neighbors or local authorities. The investigation received a crucial break from an unexpected source: Mason Reed, a local farmer whose property bordered one of the areas where the false state trooper had been observed by Hunter Brooks during his late-night trucking runs. Reed contacted the task force after recognizing the suspect's description in news reports that had begun circulating throughout the region, explaining that he had observed suspicious activity at an abandoned industrial facility approximately 5 miles from his farm. "I've been seeing lights at that old place maybe a dozen times over the past year or so," Reed told Thompson during their interview at his farmhouse kitchen, his weathered hands gesturing toward the direction of the abandoned facility. "Always late at night, always during the worst weather we get. Blizzards, ice storms, heavy rain. At first, I figured it was just kids messing around, or maybe somebody dumping garbage illegally, but after seeing the news about this fake police officer, I started thinking it might be connected to what you folks are investigating." Reed's observations provided several important details about the suspicious activity he had witnessed. The lights appeared to be vehicle headlights rather than fixed illumination, suggesting that someone was regularly driving to and from the abandoned facility during nighttime hours. The activity always occurred during severe weather events, consistent with the timing of the highway abductions. Most significantly, Reed had observed what appeared to be a police-style vehicle on several occasions, though he had never gotten close enough to determine whether it was a legitimate law enforcement unit. The abandoned facility that Reed had identified was a former agricultural processing plant that had been closed since 2005, following economic changes in the regional farming industry. County records indicated that the property had been purchased 18 months earlier by a shell company registered in Delaware, with the transaction conducted entirely in cash through a series of intermediary corporations that made the actual buyer's identity nearly impossible to trace through conventional investigation methods. Thompson and Agent Turner conducted an initial surveillance of the property on March 8, 2019, coordinating with tactical units from both the Michigan State Police and the FBI to ensure they were prepared for any contingency they might encounter. The facility appeared completely deserted during daylight hours, showing no signs of recent activity or current occupation. However, thermal imaging equipment detected heat signatures consistent with human occupation in what appeared to be the main building's basement level. The decision to conduct a tactical raid on the abandoned facility required extensive planning and coordination due to the strong possibility that missing persons were being held inside the building. The operation needed to be executed with precision to minimize the risk to any potential victims while preventing the suspect's escape and preserving crucial evidence that might reveal the full scope of the criminal enterprise they were investigating. The tactical operation was scheduled for dawn on March 10, 2019, involving more than 40 law enforcement officers from multiple agencies including the Michigan State Police Emergency Support Team, FBI Hostage Rescue Team specialists, and tactical units from Bay and Saginaw County Sheriff Departments. The raid was planned to approach the facility from multiple directions simultaneously, with specific teams assigned to secure potential escape routes, establish perimeter control, and conduct the actual building entry and search operations. What the tactical teams discovered inside the abandoned facility exceeded even Agent Turner's most disturbing projections based on her psychological profile of their suspect. The building's basement level had been extensively modified and converted into a series of holding cells, each equipped with basic amenities including cots, chemical toilets, and water supplies, but secured with industrial-grade locks and reinforced steel doors that would have made escape impossible without outside assistance. 5 of the 7 missing travelers who had disappeared from the Inner 75 corridor were found alive, but in various states of physical and psychological distress that would require extensive medical treatment and psychological counseling. Dakota Smith, the pharmaceutical sales representative whose disappearance had initiated the entire investigation, had been held captive for nearly 2 months and showed signs of severe weight loss and psychological trauma. Austin Hayes, the insurance adjuster, whose disappearance had led Thompson to recognize the pattern, displayed symptoms of prolonged malnutrition and what psychologists would later diagnose as acute stress disorder. 3 additional victims, Casey Morgan, a software developer from Indiana, Jordan Phillips, a real estate agent from Illinois, and Riley Parker, a nurse from Ohio, were found in similarly dire condition but alive and coherent enough to provide initial statements about their captivity. Each victim had been held in individual cells with minimal contact with the others, creating psychological isolation that had been part of their captor's method of maintaining control over them. The most disturbing discovery was the extensive documentation that the captor had maintained about each victim throughout their period of captivity. Detailed files contained personal information that had been extracted through systematic interrogation, including family details, financial information, employment records, and social security numbers. The files also included documentation of the captor's attempts to assume their identities for various fraudulent purposes, including credit card applications, loan documents, and even attempts to access their employment benefits. The facility also contained sophisticated equipment for creating false identification documents, including professional-grade photography equipment, laminating machines, and computer systems loaded with software designed for document manipulation and forgery. Bank records and financial documents found throughout the facility indicated that the captor had been systematically accessing the victims' bank accounts and credit information, generating thousands of dollars through identity theft while they remained in captivity. Perhaps most chilling was the discovery of detailed plans for expanding the operation, including architectural drawings for additional holding facilities and correspondence with individuals in other states who appeared to be operating similar criminal enterprises. The scope of the planned expansion suggested that their suspect had been working to create a network of abduction and identity theft operations along major interstate highway corridors throughout the Midwest. The suspect, who had evaded capture during the initial raid by escaping through a concealed tunnel system that connected the main facility to an abandoned storm drain, was identified through fingerprints found throughout the facility as Garrett Walsh, a 43-year-old former security guard with an extensive criminal history spanning multiple states. Walsh's background revealed a pattern of escalating criminal behavior focused on identity theft, fraud, and the abuse of authority positions that had apparently led to the sophisticated predatory system he had developed along the HOD 75 corridor. Walsh's criminal history included previous convictions for identity theft in Ohio and Indiana, along with several charges related to impersonating law enforcement officers that had resulted in relatively minor penalties. He had been dismissed from multiple security guard positions for misconduct involving the abuse of his limited authority, including incidents where he had detained individuals without proper justification and had been accused of stealing personal information from people he encountered during his security duties. The investigation into Walsh's background revealed that he had been systematically studying law enforcement procedures for several years, attending public safety seminars, purchasing law enforcement training materials, and even attempting to apply to several police academies before his criminal history prevented his acceptance into any legitimate law enforcement training program. His obsession with law enforcement authority had apparently evolved into the elaborate impersonation scheme that allowed him to prey on interstate travelers with minimal risk of detection. Walsh was eventually apprehended 3 days after the facility raid when he attempted to access a storage unit registered under one of his false identities. Surveillance teams had identified several properties associated with Walsh's various aliases, and his capture came when he triggered motion sensors at a self-storage facility where he had apparently maintained backup equipment and documentation for his criminal activities. During his interrogation following his arrest, Walsh revealed the methodology behind his crimes, with a disturbing mixture of pride and resentment toward the legitimate law enforcement officers he had been impersonating. His detailed confession provided insights into the psychological motivations driving his criminal behavior, and revealed information about additional victims and criminal activities that the investigation had not yet discovered. People automatically trust the uniform, Walsh told investigators during one of his lengthy interrogation sessions, displaying an attitude that combined arrogance with deep-seated resentment toward authority figures. You put on a badge, and suddenly everyone believes everything you say, follows every instruction you give. They'll get out of their cars in the middle of a blizzard, hand over their identification, answer any question you ask. It's amazing how much power people will voluntarily hand over to someone they think represents legitimate authority. Walsh's detailed descriptions of his methods revealed the sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques he had developed to overcome his victims' natural caution and resistance. He had studied law enforcement training materials to learn proper procedures for conducting traffic stops, had practiced official-sounding radio communications, and had even memorized portions of the Michigan Vehicle Code to be able to cite specific violations when questioned by suspicious motorists. The scope of Walsh's criminal activities extended far beyond the 7 confirmed abductions along the War 75 corridor. His records indicated that he had been studying similar highway systems throughout the Midwest, with evidence linking him to numerous identity theft cases in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. Financial records suggested that his criminal enterprise had generated more than $200,000 through fraudulent credit accounts, loan applications, and direct theft from his victims' financial accounts. The testimony provided by the 5 survivors of Walsh's criminal enterprise revealed the horrifying psychological manipulation and systematic abuse they had endured during their captivity. Each victim's account provided crucial details about Walsh's methods while demonstrating the profound trauma that would require years of recovery and rehabilitation. Dakota Smith, whose disappearance had initiated the investigation, provided the most detailed account of the initial abduction process and the early stages of captivity. Smith described how Walsh had approached his vehicle during the January blizzard, presenting himself as a concerned state trooper who was conducting safety checks on vehicles traveling in dangerous conditions. The false officer had been completely convincing, displaying proper identification, using appropriate law enforcement terminology, and demonstrating what appeared to be genuine concern for Smith's welfare. He seemed like every other police officer I'd ever encountered, Smith told Thompson and Agent Turner during his debriefing at the hospital where he was receiving medical treatment. Professional demeanor, proper uniform, even had business cards with the Michigan State Police logo. He asked about my destination, whether I had emergency supplies in my vehicle, all the questions you'd expect during a weather-related safety stop. I never had any reason to suspect he wasn't legitimate until I felt the needle go into my hand. Smith's account of his captivity revealed Walsh's systematic approach to extracting personal information from his victims. Rather than using physical torture or extreme coercion, Walsh had employed sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques designed to make his victims believe that cooperation would lead to their eventual release. He had presented himself as someone who was being paid by criminal organizations to obtain specific information, suggesting that the victim's compliance would satisfy his employers and result in their freedom. He convinced me that he was just a middleman, Smith explained, his voice still showing the effects of prolonged stress and trauma. Said that certain people wanted information about my work, my clients, my financial situation, and that once he had what they needed, I'd be released unharmed. He made it seem like a business transaction rather than a kidnapping. It took weeks before I realized that he wasn't working for anyone else, that he was using the information himself. Austin Hayes, the insurance adjuster whose disappearance had confirmed the pattern Thompson had identified, described a similar process of psychological manipulation combined with gradually escalating threats. Walsh had initially treated Hayes with apparent respect and consideration, providing adequate food and basic necessities while conducting what he called interviews about Hayes's personal and professional life. Only gradually had the true nature of the situation become apparent, as Walsh's demands for information became more extensive and intrusive. The questioning sessions could last for hours, Hayes recalled during his statement to investigators. He wanted to know everything: where I worked, what kind of access I had to company systems, details about my family members, my banking information, credit card accounts, everything. He had this way of making it seem reasonable, like he was helping me by keeping the process civilized and professional. But if I hesitated or refused to answer something, the threats would start. The three additional victims, Casey Morgan, Jordan Phillips, and Riley Parker, each provided accounts that revealed different aspects of Walsh's criminal methodology. Morgan, the software developer, had been targeted specifically because of his technical expertise and access to computer systems that Walsh believed could be exploited for additional fraudulent activities. Phillips, the real estate agent, had been interrogated extensively about property transactions and client information that Walsh apparently intended to use for mortgage fraud schemes. Parker, the nurse, had been questioned about hospital procedures and patient information that suggested Walsh was considering expanding his criminal activities to include healthcare fraud. The medical evaluation of all 5 survivors revealed the physical toll of their extended captivity. Despite receiving basic nutrition and medical care sufficient to keep them alive and functional, all showed signs of vitamin deficiencies, muscle atrophy from confinement, and stress-related health problems including elevated blood pressure, sleep disorders, and symptoms consistent with acute stress reaction. The psychological evaluation conducted by trauma specialists revealed that all 5 victims would require extensive counseling and support to recover from their ordeal. Dr. Michelle Clark, the psychologist who coordinated the victims' initial mental health assessment, explained the complex psychological dynamics that had allowed Walsh to maintain control over his captives for extended periods without the use of extreme physical restraints or violence. Walsh had created a carefully controlled environment designed to foster dependence and compliance, Dr. Clark explained to the task force during one of their briefings. By presenting himself as the sole source of information about when they might be released, and by maintaining the fiction that cooperation would lead to freedom, he was able to extract compliance without resorting to the kind of brutal coercion that might have prompted more desperate escape attempts. The process of helping the survivors rebuild their lives extended far beyond their initial medical treatment and psychological evaluation. Each victim faced months of legal and financial complications as they worked to restore their identities and repair the damage caused by the fraudulent accounts and transactions that Walsh had conducted using their personal information. Credit reports showed unauthorized activity totaling more than $75,000 across all 5 victims, including fraudulent credit card accounts, unauthorized loans, and attempts to access their employment benefits and retirement accounts. Thompson found himself serving as a liaison between the victims and the various agencies working to help them recover from Walsh's crimes. The complexity of identity theft cases meant that each victim had to work with multiple banks, credit reporting agencies, government offices, and insurance companies to document the fraudulent activity and restore their legitimate financial standing. The process was time-consuming and emotionally exhausting for individuals who were already dealing with the psychological trauma of their captivity. While the rescue of 5 victims represented a significant victory for the task force, the fate of the 2 missing travelers who had not been found at Walsh's facility remained an urgent priority. Tyler Bennett, a marketing consultant from Kentucky, and Brandon Cooper, an engineer from Tennessee, had both disappeared under circumstances identical to the other victims, but their whereabouts remained unknown even after Walsh's arrest and interrogation. During his extended interrogation sessions, Walsh initially refused to provide information about Bennett and Cooper, maintaining that he had never encountered either individual and suggesting that their disappearances might be unrelated to his activities along the E75 corridor. However, evidence recovered from his facility clearly indicated otherwise, including personal items belonging to both men and detailed files containing their personal information similar to those maintained for the other victims. Agent Turner employed advanced interrogation techniques designed to overcome Walsh's resistance to revealing the location of the missing men. She understood that Walsh's personality type thrived on maintaining control and power over others, and that he was likely withholding information about Bennett and Cooper as a way of maintaining some form of leverage even after his capture. Her approach involved demonstrating to Walsh that cooperation in locating the missing men might result in more favorable treatment during his eventual sentencing. The breakthrough came when Turner presented Walsh with evidence that the FBI had identified additional criminal activities beyond those related to the E75 disappearances. Financial records and computer files recovered from his facility indicated involvement in a much broader network of identity theft and fraud operations spanning multiple states. The possibility of additional federal charges carrying significantly longer prison sentences finally motivated Walsh to provide information about the 2 missing victims. There, at the backup location, Walsh finally revealed during an interrogation session on March 18th, 8 days after his initial arrest. I had to move them when I started getting nervous about all the police activity on I-75. Figured it was better to have them somewhere completely separate from the main operation in case something went wrong. Walsh's admission led to directions to an abandoned farmhouse in Genesee County, approximately 40 miles from the primary facility where the other victims had been held. The rescue of Tyler Bennett and Brandon Cooper required another carefully coordinated tactical operation, as Walsh had warned that the secondary location was equipped with security measures designed to prevent unauthorized access. However, the operation proceeded without incident, and both men were found alive but in considerably worse condition than the victims recovered from the primary facility. Bennett and Cooper had been held in what could only be described as makeshift prison cells constructed in the farmhouse's basement, with minimal amenities and under conditions that were significantly more harsh than those experienced by the other victims. Both men showed signs of severe malnutrition and dehydration, requiring immediate hospitalization and intensive medical treatment to stabilize their conditions. The difference in treatment between the victims held at the two locations appeared to be related to the timing of their abductions and Walsh's increasing paranoia about law enforcement attention. Bennett and Cooper had been moved to the secondary facility when Walsh began to suspect that his activities were being investigated, and the inferior conditions at the backup location reflected his focus on maintaining operational security rather than preserving the victim's long-term health and usefulness for identity theft purposes. Dr. Stephanie Moore, the emergency physician who coordinated Bennett and Cooper's initial treatment, explained that both men had been close to requiring life-saving intervention when they were discovered. Their conditions were considerably more critical than the other victims, Dr. Moore told investigators. They showed signs of severe dehydration, malnutrition, and what appeared to be early stages of organ dysfunction related to prolonged stress and inadequate nutrition. If they had remained in those conditions for much longer, we might have been dealing with a very different outcome. The recovery of all 7 victims alive represented an unprecedented success for the task force and provided complete closure for the families who had endured months of uncertainty about their loved ones' fates. However, the investigation also revealed disturbing evidence that Walsh's criminal activities had extended far beyond the I-75 corridor and involved connections to other criminal organizations that remained to be fully investigated. As FBI analysts continued processing the massive amount of digital evidence recovered from Walsh's facilities, they uncovered communications and financial records, indicating that his I-75 operation was just one component of a much larger criminal network operating along major highway corridors throughout the Midwest and Southeast. The discovery of this broader conspiracy would require expanding the investigation far beyond the original scope of the Highway Shield Task Force. The breakthrough in understanding the network's structure came when FBI cybercrimes specialists successfully decrypted Walsh's computer files, revealing extensive correspondence with individuals in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Alabama, who appeared to be operating similar schemes targeting interstate travelers. These communications detailed coordination of timing between different operations, sharing of intelligence about law enforcement patrol patterns, and exchange of victim information that suggested a sophisticated level of criminal organization. Agent Turner coordinated with FBI field offices in 7 different states to begin identifying and investigating the network members whose identities had been revealed through Walsh's communications. The scope of the investigation required unprecedented cooperation between state law enforcement agencies and federal authorities, as the network appeared to have been operating for several years with sufficient sophistication to avoid detection by individual jurisdictions working independently. The network's operational structure, as revealed through Walsh's files, resembled a franchise model for criminal activity. Each member operated independently within their assigned territory, typically a specific interstate highway corridor, but shared resources, intelligence, and techniques through encrypted communications managed by a central coordinator. The system allowed individual operators to benefit from the collective experience and knowledge of the entire network, while maintaining operational security through compartmentalization. Thompson's role in the expanded investigation involved coordinating with law enforcement agencies in the states where network members had been identified. His expertise in highway patrol procedures and his intimate knowledge of Walsh's methods made him a valuable resource for investigators who were encountering this type of criminal activity for the first time in their jurisdictions. The investigation revealed that the network had been systematically studying law enforcement response patterns, documenting how different agencies investigated missing persons cases, and identifying weaknesses in interagency communication that could be exploited to avoid detection. Their operational manual, recovered from Walsh's encrypted files, read like a comprehensive guide to evading law enforcement detection while conducting criminal activities on interstate highway systems. Most disturbing was the discovery that network members had gained access to certain law enforcement databases through corrupt officials in several agencies, allowing them to monitor ongoing investigations and adjust their operations to avoid detection. The identification of these corrupt officials and the extent of their cooperation with the criminal network became a priority investigation for the FBI's Internal Corruption Unit. The network's communications also revealed disturbing details about their victim selection criteria and methods. Members would identify potential victims at truck stops, rest areas, and gas stations, then shadow them along interstate corridors until optimal conditions arose for interception. They maintained detailed databases of vehicle types, license plate patterns, and demographic information that helped them select targets least likely to be immediately missed by family members or employers. Marlo Kincaid, identified through the communications as the network's central coordinator, operated under the code name The Dispatcher, and had been managing the criminal enterprise from a base in Louisville, Kentucky. Kincaid's background investigation revealed that he was a former telecommunications systems administrator who had been dismissed from his position with a major cellular service provider, following allegations of unauthorized access to customer data. The arrest of Kincaid and the simultaneous raids on facilities operated by network members across 7 states represented one of the largest coordinated law enforcement operations in recent history. Operation Highway Shield, as the expanded investigation was designated, involved more than 300 law enforcement officers and resulted in the discovery of additional victims and criminal enterprises that investigators had not previously suspected. The arrest of Marlo Kincaid at his Louisville residence yielded a treasure trove of information that revealed the true scope of the criminal network that had been operating along America's interstate highway system. Kincaid's computers contained detailed records of more than 200 victims across multiple states, along with financial data showing that the network had generated millions of dollars through identity theft, fraud, and what appeared to be human trafficking operations conducted over a period of nearly 8 years. Kincaid's operation was far more sophisticated than even Agent Turner's most pessimistic projections had suggested. He had maintained detailed psychological profiles of network members, using this information to manipulate and control their activities while insulating himself from direct participation in the actual crimes. His files revealed that he had been recruiting new members through careful cultivation of individuals with criminal backgrounds, financial difficulties, and psychological profiles that made them susceptible to his influence and control. The technical investigation of Kincaid's communication system revealed advanced encryption and security measures that had allowed the network to operate for years without detection by law enforcement monitoring systems. Kincaid had used his expertise in telecommunications to create a communication network that appeared to be routine business traffic to automated monitoring systems, while actually facilitating criminal coordination across multiple states. Thompson participated in the interrogation of Kincaid, providing insights into Walsh's specific methods and helping to identify connections between the OR-75 operations and the broader network activities. Kincaid's personality proved to be a fascinating study in criminal psychology. He displayed technical sophistication combined with manipulative abilities that had allowed him to maintain control over network members while avoiding direct involvement in violent crimes that might have attracted more aggressive law enforcement attention. Kincaid saw himself as running a business. Agent Turner explained to Thompson after one of their lengthy interrogation sessions with the network coordinator. In his mind, he was providing a service to network members by coordinating their activities and sharing intelligence that made their individual operations more successful. he had convinced himself that he wasn't directly responsible for the harm caused to victims because he wasn't personally involved in the abductions or identity theft activities. The financial investigation into the network's operations revealed a complex web of shell companies, cryptocurrency transactions, and international money transfers that had allowed them to profit from their crimes while avoiding detection by financial monitoring systems. Treasury Department analysts traced the movement of funds through dozens of accounts across multiple countries, uncovering a money laundering operation that was generating profits far beyond what the individual identity theft activities would have produced. The network had also been selling victims' personal information to other criminal organizations, expanding their impact far beyond the direct crimes committed against the individuals they had abducted. Credit card fraud, tax fraud, and loan fraud schemes had been perpetrated using stolen identities, affecting hundreds of additional victims who never knew their information had been compromised until long after the damage had been done. Kincaid's records revealed that the network had been reinvesting profits into expanding their operations, purchasing additional facilities, upgrading their technical capabilities, and recruiting new members through sophisticated online recruitment processes. This growth model had allowed them to increase their activities year over year, while maintaining operational security that had kept them invisible to law enforcement for nearly a decade. The most chilling aspect of Kincaid's operation was the discovery of expansion plans that would have extended the network's activities to every major interstate highway corridor in the United States. His files contained detailed analysis of traffic patterns, law enforcement response times, and demographic data for potential target areas in more than 20 states. The scope of the planned expansion suggested that law enforcement had intervened just as the network was preparing to become a national-level criminal enterprise. The prosecution of the interstate highway predation network required coordination between multiple jurisdictions and presented unique challenges for the American legal system. Federal prosecutors worked with state attorneys general to ensure that the charges filed against network members would result in sentences commensurate with the scope and impact of their criminal activities. Garrett Walsh ultimately accepted a plea agreement that required him to provide complete cooperation with the ongoing investigation in exchange for avoiding the death penalty that federal prosecutors had been prepared to seek for his role in the network's activities. His detailed confession and testimony against other network members proved crucial in securing convictions across multiple jurisdictions, though his cooperation did not significantly reduce his sentence given the severity of his crimes. Walsh was sentenced to multiple life terms without the possibility of parole on federal charges, including kidnapping, identity theft, conspiracy, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. The federal judge who imposed the sentence noted that Walsh's abuse of law enforcement symbols and public trust represented a particularly egregious aspect of his crimes that warranted the harshest possible punishment under federal law. Marlo Kincaid's trial became a precedent-setting case for prosecuting criminal organizations that used advanced technology to coordinate interstate criminal activities. His conviction on charges of racketeering, conspiracy, operating a continuing criminal enterprise, and money laundering resulted in a sentence of 55 years in federal prison. The case established new legal frameworks for prosecuting individuals who coordinate criminal activities through encrypted communications while avoiding direct participation in violent crimes. Thompson testified in multiple trials across several states, providing crucial evidence about the network's operational methods and the impact of their crimes on victims and communities. His detailed documentation of crime scenes, victim statements, and investigative procedures proved essential in securing convictions against network members who might otherwise have been able to claim that they were operating independently rather than as part of a coordinated criminal organization. The legal proceedings also highlighted significant gaps in existing laws related to interstate crime coordination and the use of technology to facilitate criminal enterprises. Several states modified their legal codes to address the techniques used by the network, creating new categories of crimes and enhanced penalties for technologically sophisticated criminal organizations that targeted interstate travelers. The civil litigation resulting from the network's activities proved to be almost as complex as the criminal prosecutions. Victims filed lawsuits against financial institutions, credit reporting agencies, and government agencies whose security failures had been exploited by the network's identity theft operations. The total damages claimed in civil actions exceeded $50 million, representing both direct financial losses and compensation for the psychological trauma suffered by victims. Dr. Jessica Taylor, a forensic psychologist who evaluated many of the network's victims for civil litigation purposes, explained the long-term impact of the crimes on survivors and their families. The psychological damage from these crimes extends far beyond the immediate trauma of abduction and captivity, Dr. Taylor testified during one of the civil proceedings. Victims lose fundamental trust in authority figures, in the safety of interstate travel, and in the security of their personal information. These effects can last for decades and impact every aspect of their lives. The Highway Shield investigation prompted comprehensive changes in how law enforcement agencies approach interstate crime coordination and highway safety. The FBI established a permanent interstate highway crimes task force, with dedicated personnel assigned to monitor and investigate criminal organizations that exploit transportation infrastructure for predatory purposes. Michigan State Police implemented extensive new training programs for troopers focused on recognizing patterns of predatory behavior along highway corridors. Thompson became a key instructor in these programs, sharing his experience from the Walsh investigation to help other officers identify similar threats before they could escalate to the level of systematic predation that had occurred along the R-75 corridor. The training curriculum Thompson developed emphasized the importance of detailed documentation and rapid communication with other agencies when unusual patterns were detected in missing persons cases or abandoned vehicle incidents. New troopers learned about the warning signs that might indicate the presence of criminal organizations targeting travelers, including seemingly routine incidents that might be components of larger criminal schemes. Technology companies were also significantly affected by the investigation's findings. The discovery that the network had exploited vulnerabilities in cellular communication systems, GPS navigation, and financial networks led to enhanced security measures and improved cooperation between private companies and law enforcement agencies. New protocols were established for monitoring suspicious communications patterns and detecting potential criminal coordination activities. The investigation also led to improvements in information sharing between law enforcement agencies at all levels. New protocols were established for rapidly disseminating information about missing persons cases that might be connected to broader criminal enterprises, reducing the time required to identify patterns that might otherwise remain invisible for months or years. Federal legislation resulting from the Highway Shield investigation included the Interstate Highway Security Enhancement Act, which established new requirements for information sharing between agencies and provided additional resources for investigating crimes that span multiple jurisdictions. The legislation also created new categories of federal crimes related to the systematic targeting of interstate travelers and enhanced penalties for criminal organizations that exploit transportation infrastructure. The changes extended beyond law enforcement to include public education and awareness programs designed to help travelers protect themselves from similar threats. Rest areas and truck stops along major interstate corridors now display information about how to verify the authenticity of law enforcement contacts. including procedures for requesting backup officer verification during traffic stops and resources for reporting suspicious activity. Thompson's role evolved from investigating a specific series of disappearances to helping develop national strategies for combating highway predation. His experience with the Walsh Network made him a valuable consultant for training programs and policy development efforts at both state and federal levels. He regularly speaks at law enforcement conferences about the importance of pattern recognition and interagency cooperation in modern policing. Today, more than 5 years after the conclusion of the Highway Shield investigation, the stretch of I-75, where Garrett Walsh conducted his crimes, appears unchanged to passing motorists. Traffic flows normally. Emergency services respond promptly to legitimate incidents, and Michigan State Troopers continue their patrols with the same professional dedication that has always characterized the force. However, for those who lived through the investigation, and for the law enforcement community more broadly, the case represents a fundamental change in understanding the threats that can emerge along America's interstate highway system. Thompson continues his career with the Michigan State Police, though his duties now focus primarily on training and developing investigative protocols for complex interstate crimes. His patrol car carries additional equipment designed to help motorists verify his identity when requested, and he encourages citizens to use verification procedures whenever they have concerns about law enforcement encounters. The cards he carries now include QR codes that link to the Michigan State Police website, allowing citizens to instantly verify his credentials through their mobile devices. The most important lesson from the Highway Shield investigation, Thompson explains to new recruits during training sessions, is that our authority as law enforcement officers comes with an absolute responsibility to protect not just individual citizens, but the trust that makes our entire system work. When criminals exploit that trust, they're not just harming their immediate victims, they're undermining the foundation of public safety itself. The 7 survivors of Walsh's crimes have moved forward with their lives, though the experience left lasting impacts that continue to influence their daily routines and perspectives. Several have become advocates for highway safety and law enforcement verification procedures, speaking at conferences and training sessions to help others recognize potential warning signs of criminal impersonation and predatory behavior. Dakota Smith, whose disappearance had initiated the investigation that ultimately dismantled the entire network, eventually returned to pharmaceutical sales, but fundamentally changed his approach to business travel. I maintain constant communication with my family and my employer during all business trips now, Smith explains during interviews about his experience. And I never pull over for any law enforcement officer, day or night, without first calling 911 to verify that it's a legitimate stop. Some people might think that sounds paranoid, but after what I experienced with Walsh and his network, I'd rather be cautious than become another victim of someone exploiting public trust. The abandoned facilities where Walsh and his network held their victims have been demolished, with the sites converted into rest areas and memorial parks dedicated to highway safety awareness. These locations now serve as permanent reminders of the investigation and provide information about how travelers can protect themselves from similar threats. The memorial at the primary facility site includes a bronze plaque listing the names of all 7 survivors and acknowledging the law enforcement officers whose dedication and persistence brought their ordeal to an end. For the broader law enforcement community, the Highway Shield investigation continues to influence training and operational procedures throughout the United States. The case has become a standard component of training curricula at the FBI Academy, state police training facilities, and criminal justice educational programs. It demonstrates that even the most sophisticated criminal enterprises can be defeated through careful investigation, interagency cooperation, and the dedication of officers who understand that their responsibility extends beyond individual cases to protecting the integrity of the entire law enforcement system. The case of the I-75 vanishing mile stands as a testament to the importance of pattern recognition, technological awareness, and the persistence of investigators who understand that sometimes the most dangerous criminals are those who comprehend exactly how public trust operates and how to exploit it for their own purposes. It serves as a permanent reminder that the thin blue line between order and chaos requires constant vigilance to maintain, and that those who wear the badge must always prove themselves worthy of the trust it represents. Thompson's career has been forever shaped by his experience with the Highway Shield investigation. Every shift begins with the same awareness that guided him through the darkest days of hunting Walsh and his network. The uniform he wears represents something larger than himself, something that millions of citizens depend on for their safety and security. That responsibility, he knows, is not something that can ever be taken lightly or for granted. The mile markers along I-75 between exits 160 and 172 now carry additional significance for Michigan State police officers, serving as a reminder of the case that fundamentally changed how they understand their relationship with the public they serve. It's a stretch of highway where the price of vigilance was measured not in traffic citations or routine accident responses, but in human lives that were saved through the dedication of officers who recognize that sometimes the most mundane incidents can be the first threads that, when pulled carefully by skilled investigators, unravel criminal enterprises of stunning complexity and scope. In the end, the Highway Shield investigation represents both a sobering reminder of the vulnerabilities that exist in modern society and an inspiring example of what can be accomplished when law enforcement agencies work together with dedication, professionalism, and an unwavering commitment to protecting the innocent. It's a case that will continue to influence highway patrol operations and interstate crime investigation for generations to come, ensuring that the lessons learned from those dark months in 2019 serve to protect countless future travelers along America's vast interstate highway system. The investigation also highlighted the crucial importance of citizen reporting and community awareness in combating sophisticated criminal enterprises. The breakthrough provided by trucker Hunter Brooks demonstrated that law enforcement agencies cannot effectively combat interstate crime without the cooperation and vigilance of the traveling public. His willingness to come forward with his observations proved to be the key that unlocked the entire investigation and ultimately saved 7 lives. As America's interstate highway system continues to evolve with new technologies and changing travel patterns, the lessons of the Highway Shield investigation remain relevant and important. The case serves as a permanent reminder that the freedom and safety of interstate travel depends not just on properly maintained roads and vehicles, but on the continued vigilance of law enforcement officers who understand that their duty extends to protecting the trust and security that makes modern transportation possible. For Michigan State Trooper Michael Thompson, the investigation that began with a single abandoned vehicle in a January blizzard became a career-defining experience that continues to influence his approach to law enforcement and his understanding of the responsibility that comes with wearing the badge. His story serves as an inspiration to law enforcement officers everywhere who understand that sometimes the most important cases begin with the most important routine calls, and that the difference between a routine incident and a breakthrough investigation often depends on the dedication and persistence of officers who refuse to accept that unusual patterns are merely coincidental. The stretch of E75 where it all began continues to see normal traffic flow, emergency responses, and the routine activities that characterize America's interstate highway system. But for those who know the history, those mile markers will always represent something more. The place where trust was betrayed, justice was served, and the thin blue line held firm against those who would exploit the very symbols designed to protect and serve the American people. Ohio State Trooper David Rodriguez had conducted thousands of traffic stops during his 11 years patrolling the I-270 outer belt around Columbus. But nothing in his extensive experience had prepared him for the chain of events that would begin on a seemingly routine Tuesday morning in October 2020. The autumn sun was just beginning to burn through the early morning mist when Rodriguez clocked a black Dodge Challenger traveling eastbound at 87 miles per hour in a 65 miles per hour zone, a violation that would normally result in a straightforward citation and a brief lecture about highway safety. At precisely 7:42 a.m., Rodriguez activated his emergency lights and initiated what he expected to be a routine traffic stop. The Challenger initially appeared to comply, reducing speed and moving toward the shoulder near mile marker 23, just east of the A71 interchange. Rodriguez followed standard protocol, radioing his position to dispatch and running the vehicle's license plate through the law enforcement automated data system while maintaining a safe following distance behind the violator. "Dispatch, this is Unit 23, Rodriguez reported, his voice carrying the practiced calm of an experienced officer, beginning what appeared to be a routine enforcement action. "I'm conducting a traffic stop on eastbound Y-270 at mile marker 23. Vehicle is a black Dodge Challenger, Ohio plate number Henry, Charlie 7849. Running a plate check now and will advise of any complications." The response from dispatcher Lisa Patterson came back within 30 seconds, but the information she provided immediately elevated Rodriguez's alert level and transformed what had seemed like a routine speeding violation into something potentially much more serious. "Unit 23. That plate comes back registered to a 2018 Dodge Challenger reported stolen out of Cincinnati 3 days ago. Vehicle was taken during an armed carjacking on October the 15th. Consider the occupants armed and extremely dangerous." Rodriguez immediately requested backup while maintaining visual contact with the Challenger, which had now pulled completely onto the shoulder and appeared to be complying with the traffic stop. However, his training and experience told him that the situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. Stolen vehicles, particularly those taken during violent crimes, often involved suspects who would go to extreme lengths to avoid arrest, and the early morning timing meant that backup units might be several minutes away. As Rodriguez waited for backup to arrive, he observed the Challenger through his binoculars, noting details that would prove crucial to the investigation that followed. The vehicle appeared to contain at least 2 occupants, though the tinted windows made it difficult to determine exact numbers or observe their actions. The driver appeared to be a young male, while movement in the passenger seat suggested at least one additional person. Most concerning was what appeared to be frequent, agitated gestures between the occupants, suggesting they were engaged in intense discussion about their situation. At 7:47 a.m., just as Rodriguez received word that backup units were en route with an estimated arrival time of 4 minutes, the situation took a dramatic and violent turn. Without warning, the Challenger's engine roared to life, its tires smoking as the driver floored the accelerator and pulled back onto I-270 at high speed. Rodriguez immediately activated his siren and began pursuit, simultaneously broadcasting a Code 3 emergency pursuit notification to dispatch and all units in the area. "Dispatch, Unit 23 is now in pursuit of the stolen Challenger, eastbound on I-270 from mile marker 23, Rodriguez radioed, his voice tense but controlled, as he accelerated to match the fleeing vehicle's speed. Vehicle is traveling at approximately 95 miles per hour and increasing. Request immediate backup and helicopter support. Occupants should be considered armed and extremely dangerous due to the original carjacking circumstances. The high-speed chase that followed would cover more than 40 miles of interstate highway, involve multiple law enforcement agencies, and ultimately result in a catastrophe that would fundamentally change Ohio State Patrol pursuit policies while raising disturbing questions about the true identity of the individuals in the stolen Challenger. What began as a routine traffic enforcement action was about to become one of the most controversial and tragic pursuits in Ohio law enforcement history. Rodriguez's patrol vehicle, a specially equipped Ford Police Interceptor designed for high-speed pursuit situations, was capable of matching the Challenger's performance, but the fleeing vehicle had several tactical advantages that would prove crucial as the chase developed. The Challenger's more powerful engine and lighter weight gave it superior acceleration, while its driver's apparent willingness to take extreme risks allowed the stolen vehicle to maintain distance by weaving dangerously through traffic and ignoring basic safety considerations. As the pursuit continued eastbound on the 270, Rodriguez found himself dealing with increasingly heavy morning commuter traffic that complicated his ability to safely maintain contact with the fleeing vehicle. The Challenger's driver was demonstrating a complete disregard for public safety, passing other vehicles on the shoulder, forcing cars off the roadway, and reaching speeds that Rodriguez's radar indicated were approaching 120 miles per hour in areas where traffic conditions made such speeds extremely dangerous. Dispatch: the suspect vehicle is now traveling at speeds exceeding 115 miles per hour and is driving extremely recklessly, Rodriguez reported. His concentration divided between maintaining pursuit and avoiding collisions with other traffic. The driver is passing on the shoulder, crossing multiple lanes without signaling, and appears to have no regard for public safety. Traffic conditions are becoming increasingly dangerous, and I'm concerned about civilian casualties if this continues. The response from dispatch indicated that additional units were converging on the pursuit route from multiple directions, while the Ohio State Patrol helicopter was being scrambled from its base at Rickenbacker Airport. However, the morning rush-hour traffic patterns meant that the helicopter would require at least 10 minutes to reach the scene, and the ground units were struggling to position themselves effectively due to the high speed of the chase and the unpredictable route the fleeing vehicle was taking. At mile marker 31, near the E70 interchange, the pursuit took an unexpected turn that would prove to be the beginning of the tragic sequence of events that followed. The Challenger suddenly decelerated and took the exit ramp toward eastbound 70, a maneuver that caught Rodriguez momentarily off guard and allowed the suspects to increase their lead by several hundred yards. The transition from I-270 to I-70 also meant that the pursuit was now heading directly toward one of the busiest sections of interstate highway in central Ohio during peak morning commuter hours. The transition onto eastbound Interstate 70 brought the high-speed pursuit into an entirely different operational environment that presented new challenges and exponentially increased risks. I-70 through eastern Columbus and into the suburbs carried significantly heavier traffic volume than the outer belt, with thousands of commuters beginning their daily journey to downtown offices, schools, and businesses throughout the metropolitan area. The morning rush-hour traffic created a complex and constantly changing obstacle course that both the fleeing suspects and pursuing officers would have to navigate at speeds approaching 130 miles per hour. Rodriguez immediately notified dispatch of the route change and requested that traffic control measures be implemented to warn oncoming motorists of the dangerous situation developing on Interstate 70. However, the speed of the pursuit and the distance it was covering made it virtually impossible for the Ohio Department of Transportation to deploy effective traffic management resources quickly enough to clear the roadway ahead of the chase. Dispatch: suspects have taken a 70 eastbound from I-270, Rodriguez reported. his voice showing increasing strain as he worked to maintain visual contact with the Challenger while avoiding collisions with morning commuters who were often unaware of the approaching danger until the last possible moment. Traffic volume is extremely heavy and presents significant danger to civilians. Request immediate coordination with ODOT for traffic control and warning systems. As the pursuit continued eastbound on Interstate 70, several additional Ohio State Patrol units managed to join the chase, including Unit 47 operated by Trooper James Mitchell, a 12-year veteran with extensive experience in high-speed pursuit operations. Mitchell positioned his vehicle as the secondary pursuit unit, allowing Rodriguez to maintain primary contact with the suspects while providing backup and additional radio communication capabilities. The involvement of additional units provided better tactical coordination, but also increased the complexity of the pursuit operation. Multiple high-speed vehicles traveling in formation while weaving through heavy traffic created exponentially greater risks for civilian motorists who might not be aware of the approaching danger until patrol cars and the fleeing vehicle were already upon them. The cacophony of sirens and emergency lights created confusion among commuters, many of whom made sudden, unpredictable lane changes that further complicated the tactical situation. At 8:03 a.m., approximately 21 minutes into the pursuit, the situation took a dramatic turn that would prove to be the pivotal moment in the tragic events that followed. Near mile marker 118, approaching the outskirts of Reynoldsburg, morning traffic had begun to slow due to construction zones and increased volume, as suburban commuters merged onto Interstate 70 from various feeder roads. The traffic congestion forced the Challenger to reduce speed to approximately 85 miles per hour, allowing the pursuing patrol units to close the distance significantly. Trooper Mitchell, now running parallel to Rodriguez in the left lane, observed what appeared to be objects being thrown from the passenger side window of the fleeing Challenger. Initial radio reports described these as possible weapons or contraband being discarded by the suspects, but subsequent investigation would reveal that the objects were actually cellular phones and other personal items that the occupants were apparently destroying to prevent identification or evidence recovery. Unit 47 to dispatch, Mitchell radioed. Suspects are throwing objects from the passenger window. Appear to be electronic devices, possibly cell phones, maybe attempting to destroy evidence. Also observing what appears to be increased agitation among vehicle occupants, significant arm movement and gesturing visible through rear window. The intelligence about increased agitation among the suspects proved to be prophetic. Within minutes of Mitchell's observation, the Challenger suddenly swerved across multiple lanes of traffic in what appeared to be either a deliberate attempt to cause accidents involving the pursuing patrol units or a last desperate effort to escape by taking an upcoming exit at dangerous speed. The maneuver forced several civilian vehicles to brake hard and swerve to avoid collisions, creating a chain reaction of dangerous situations across multiple lanes of the interstate. Rodriguez and Mitchell were forced to reduce speed and temporarily break off direct pursuit to avoid collisions with civilian vehicles whose drivers had panicked in response to the Challenger's reckless maneuvering. This brief separation allowed the suspects to increase their lead substantially, but it also provided the pursuing officers with a clearer view of the license plate and vehicle details that would prove crucial to the subsequent investigation. Dispatch. Suspects have created multiple traffic hazards and forced pursuing units to reduce speed for civilian safety, Rodriguez reported. We have temporarily increased following distance to prevent civilian casualties, but suspect vehicle is pulling away rapidly. Current speed approximately 110 miles per hour, eastbound on I-70 approaching mile marker 120. The decision to prioritize civilian safety over maintaining close pursuit contact was consistent with Ohio State Patrol policies regarding high-speed chases, but it also allowed the suspects to implement what appeared to be a predetermined escape plan. As Rodriguez and Mitchell worked to safely navigate through the traffic disruption caused by the Challenger's reckless maneuvering, they observed the suspect vehicle take the exit toward State Route 256, heading south toward rural areas where ground pursuit would become significantly more difficult. The transition from interstate highway to rural state routes represented a critical tactical decision point for the pursuing officers. Ohio State Patrol policy required careful consideration of public safety risks when the high-speed pursuits moved from controlled access highways to surface streets and rural roads, where the potential for civilian casualties increased dramatically. However, the serious nature of the original carjacking, combined with the suspect's demonstrated willingness to endanger public safety, argued for continued pursuit despite the increased risks. Lieutenant Robert Anderson, the shift supervisor monitoring the pursuit from the district headquarters, made the decision to authorize continued pursuit, but with modified tactical parameters designed to reduce risks while maintaining pressure on the fleeing suspects. Additional units were directed to establish perimeter positions on parallel roads, while the Ohio State Patrol helicopter, finally airborne from Rickenbacker Airport, was directed to the pursuit area to provide aerial surveillance and coordination. All units involved in the I-70 pursuit, this is Lieutenant Anderson, came the radio transmission that would authorize the continuation of what was already becoming one of the most extensive and dangerous chases in recent Ohio history. You are authorized to continue pursuit with modified protocols. Primary units maintain visual contact but increase following distance. Secondary units establish perimeter positions on parallel routes. Helicopter ETA to scene is approximately 4 minutes. Public safety remains the primary consideration. The pursuit's transition from interstate highways to rural state routes created an entirely different operational environment that presented new tactical challenges and exponentially increased risks for both the pursuing officers and innocent civilians who might encounter the high-speed chase on roads never designed for such dangerous situations. State Route 256 wound through agricultural areas and small communities where the posted speed limits were typically 55 miles per hour or less, making the Challenger's continued speeds of over 100 miles per hour extremely hazardous on roads with curves, hills, and intersections that severely limited visibility. Rodriguez and Mitchell maintained pursuit at a distance of approximately 800 yards, following Ohio State Patrol protocols that required increased separation on surface streets to provide adequate reaction time for unexpected hazards. However, the rural road conditions made visual contact with the fleeing vehicle increasingly difficult, as the Challenger disappeared over hills and around curves that prevented the pursuing officers from maintaining constant surveillance of the suspect's activities and intentions. Unit 23 to dispatch, Rodriguez radioed as the pursuit wound through the countryside east of Reynoldsburg. Suspect vehicle is maintaining speeds of approximately 95 to 105 miles per hour on State Route 256 eastbound. Road conditions include multiple curves and hills that limit visibility. Requesting updated ETA on helicopter support for aerial surveillance. The response from dispatch provided both welcome news about air support and disturbing intelligence about the suspect vehicle's background that would influence tactical decisions for the remainder of the pursuit. Unit 23, helicopter is approximately 2 minutes out and will provide aerial surveillance. Also be advised that Cincinnati PD has updated information on the original carjacking. Suspects were reported to have threatened the victim with what appeared to be automatic weapons, and at least 3 suspects were believed involved in the original crime. Vehicle may contain multiple armed individuals. This intelligence about multiple armed suspects significantly elevated the threat level for the pursuing officers and influenced Lieutenant Anderson's tactical decisions regarding the deployment of additional resources. The possibility that the Challenger contained 3 armed individuals who had already demonstrated a willingness to commit violent crimes meant that any eventual confrontation would require overwhelming tactical advantage to minimize risks to officers and civilians. At 8:19 a.m., 37 minutes into the pursuit, the Ohio State Patrol helicopter arrived over the chase area and immediately began providing aerial surveillance and coordination support that would prove crucial to the tactical management of the increasingly complex situation. The helicopter crew, consisting of pilot Christopher Davis and tactical flight officer Matthew Wilson, quickly established radio contact with the ground units and began relaying real-time intelligence about the suspect vehicle's location, speed, and direction of travel. Air 1 to ground units, we have visual contact with the suspect vehicle eastbound on State Route 256, approaching the intersection with Township Road. 2:04 came the first aerial report, providing the pursuing ground units with crucial intelligence about the suspect's location and intended direction. Vehicle appears to be occupied by 3 individuals, driver, and 2 passengers. Speed approximately 100 miles per hour on rural road with multiple curves and hills. The aerial surveillance capability immediately improved tactical coordination and allowed ground units to position themselves more effectively while maintaining safe distances that reduced risks to civilian traffic. However, the helicopter crew's observations also revealed disturbing details about the suspect's behavior and apparent intentions that suggested the situation might be heading toward an even more dangerous confrontation. Air 1 to ground units, the helicopter tactical officer reported, observing significant activity inside suspect vehicle. Multiple individuals appear to be handling objects that may be weapons, also noting that vehicle appears to be leaking fluid from what may be radiator damage. Possible mechanical issues developing that could affect suspect vehicle performance. The intelligence about possible mechanical problems with the fleeing vehicle created new tactical considerations for the pursuing officers. A vehicle suffering mechanical failure at high speed could become unpredictable and extremely dangerous, potentially resulting in a catastrophic crash that could endanger both the suspects and any pursuing officers who might be caught in the resulting accident. However, mechanical problems might also force the suspects to abandon their vehicle and attempt to escape on foot, creating an entirely different tactical scenario. As the pursuit continued deeper into rural Fairfield County, the road conditions became increasingly hazardous for high-speed operation. State Route 256 featured numerous sharp curves, steep hills, and unmarked intersections with farm roads where visibility was severely limited, and the potential for encountering slow-moving agricultural vehicles or unsuspecting civilian traffic was high. The combination of dangerous road conditions and the suspect's apparent desperation created a volatile situation that tactical commanders knew could result in tragedy at any moment. At mile post 23 on State Route 256, approximately 12 miles from where the chase had left the 70, the mechanical problems that the helicopter crew had observed finally manifested in a dramatic fashion that would prove to be the beginning of the tragic conclusion to the pursuit. The Challenger suddenly began losing speed and weaving erratically across both lanes of the rural highway, leaving a trail of what appeared to be engine coolant and oil on the roadway surface. Air 1 to ground units, suspect vehicle appears to be experiencing major mechanical failure, the helicopter tactical officer reported. Vehicle is slowing rapidly and appears to be losing power. Trail of fluid visible on roadway. Suspects may be preparing to abandon vehicle. Rodriguez and Mitchell immediately adjusted their tactical positioning to prepare for the possibility that the suspects might abandon the disabled vehicle and attempt to escape on foot into the rural terrain surrounding the highway. The area consisted of agricultural fields, wooded areas, and scattered farm buildings that could provide numerous hiding places for fleeing suspects. while also presenting tactical challenges for officers attempting to establish containment perimeters. However, rather than abandoning their vehicle as the pursuing officers expected, the suspects made a decision that would prove to be catastrophic for everyone involved in the pursuit. Instead of pulling over as their vehicle lost power, the driver of the Challenger suddenly veered left across the center line and directly into the path of an oncoming vehicle that neither the pursuing officers nor the helicopter crew had been able to warn in time due to the speed of events and the limitations of radio communication. The head-on collision between the disabled Challenger and the oncoming civilian vehicle occurred at 8:31 a.m. on State Route 256, approximately 2 miles east of the small community of Carroll. Despite the Challenger's mechanical problems, both vehicles were still traveling at significant speed when they collided. The Challenger at approximately 65 miles per hour, and the civilian vehicle, a Honda Accord operated by Tyler Bennett, a 34-year-old elementary school teacher from Lancaster, at approximately 55 miles per hour in the opposite direction. The combined impact speed of over 120 miles per hour created a devastating collision that completely destroyed both vehicles and resulted in an immediate fatality that would haunt everyone involved in the pursuit for years to come. Tyler Bennett was killed instantly in the collision, while the 3 occupants of the Challenger were critically injured but survived the initial impact. The crash site became a scene of catastrophic destruction that would require multiple emergency response agencies and several hours to fully process and clear. Rodriguez and Mitchell arrived at the collision scene within seconds of the impact, immediately broadcasting emergency medical and fire department responses while beginning tactical assessment of the situation involving the 3 injured suspects from the Challenger. Despite their critical injuries, intelligence about the suspects' involvement in armed carjacking meant that the pursuing officers had to treat them as potentially dangerous until their conditions and weapon status could be properly assessed. Dispatch, Unit 23, at the scene of major collision involving suspect vehicle and civilian car on State Route 256, Rodriguez radioed, his voice reflecting the shock and horror of witnessing the catastrophic accident. We have 1 confirmed fatality in the civilian vehicle and 3 critically injured suspects from the Challenger. Requesting immediate medical helicopter response, fire department extrication equipment, and coroner notification. Also, requesting additional tactical units to secure the scene and process potential evidence. The collision investigation that followed would become one of the most complex and controversial cases in Ohio State Patrol history, involving multiple agencies and raising fundamental questions about pursuit policies, tactical decision-making, and the balance between public safety and law enforcement responsibilities. The Ohio State Patrol's Critical Incident Investigation Team, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and the Fairfield County Sheriff's Office all became involved in processing the scene and investigating the circumstances that led to the tragic outcome. Emergency medical response to the collision scene was coordinated by the Fairfield County Emergency Medical Services, with medical helicopter support provided by MedFlight of Ohio. The 3 suspects from the Challenger were transported to Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center in Columbus, where trauma surgeons worked to stabilize their conditions while law enforcement officers maintained security to prevent any potential escape attempts. The identity of the suspects, when finally established through fingerprint analysis and database searches, revealed disturbing information that cast the entire pursuit in a new light and raised questions about whether different tactical decisions might have prevented the tragic outcome. The driver of the Challenger was identified as Brandon Cooper, a 19-year-old with an extensive juvenile criminal record, but no previous convictions for violent crimes. The 2 passengers were Austin Hayes, age 22, and Logan Pierce, age 20, both of whom had minor criminal histories but no previous involvement in serious violent offenses. Most significantly, none of the three suspects was found to be carrying weapons at the time of the collision, despite the original carjacking report from Cincinnati that had indicated the presence of automatic weapons during the initial crime. Subsequent investigation by Cincinnati police revealed that the original carjacking victim had been mistaken about the weapons. What he had perceived as firearms were actually realistic toy guns that the suspects had used to intimidate him during the vehicle theft. This revelation about the absence of actual weapons raised difficult questions about the tactical decisions made during the pursuit and whether the level of risk accepted by pursuing officers was appropriate given the actual threat level represented by the suspects. The fact that three young men with relatively minor criminal backgrounds had been pursued at high speed for nearly 40 miles, ultimately resulting in the death of an innocent civilian, became a subject of intense scrutiny by both internal affairs investigators and external oversight agencies. Dr. Daniel Johnson, the trauma surgeon who treated the three suspects at OSU Wexner Medical Center, provided medical testimony that became crucial to understanding both the collision dynamics and the suspects' conditions during the pursuit. All three individuals suffered severe trauma consistent with high-speed frontal collision, Dr. Johnson explained during subsequent legal proceedings. However, toxicology screening revealed significant levels of methamphetamine and other stimulants in all three suspects, which would explain their erratic behavior and poor decision-making throughout the pursuit. The presence of illegal stimulants in the suspects' systems provided context for their dangerous driving behavior and apparent disregard for public safety, but it also raised additional questions about whether pursuing officers could have anticipated the heightened unpredictability that drug-impaired suspects might exhibit during a high-speed chase. Ohio State Patrol pursuit policies did include provisions for considering suspect impairment as a factor in tactical decision-making, but such assessments were extremely difficult to make in real time during dynamic pursuit situations. The collision reconstruction performed by the Ohio State Patrol's Technical Crash Investigation Unit provided detailed analysis of the accident dynamics and the factors that contributed to its severity. Trooper Mark Williams, the certified crash reconstructionist who led the investigation, determined that the collision was ultimately unavoidable once the Challenger crossed the center line, but that the severity of the impact was increased by the high speeds involved and the head-on nature of the collision. Based on physical evidence, witness statements, and vehicle damage analysis, Williams reported in his official findings, the collision occurred when the suspect vehicle suddenly veered left across the center line and into the path of the oncoming civilian vehicle. The civilian driver had no opportunity to take evasive action due to the sudden nature of the suspect vehicle's movement and the high rate of speed involved. The combined impact speed was approximately 124 miles per hour, which created forces that were unsurvivable for the civilian vehicle operator. The internal investigation into the pursuit and collision involved multiple levels of oversight and review, reflecting both the tragic outcome and the complex policy questions raised by the incident. The Ohio State Patrol's Internal Affairs Division initiated a comprehensive review of all tactical decisions made during the pursuit, while the Ohio Attorney General's office assigned special prosecutors to evaluate whether any criminal charges should be filed against law enforcement personnel involved in the chase. Lieutenant Kevin Brown, the internal affairs investigator assigned to the case, conducted extensive interviews with all personnel involved in the pursuit, reviewed radio communications and vehicle camera footage, and analyzed the tactical decisions made at each phase of the operation. The investigation's scope extended beyond the immediate participants to include supervisory personnel, dispatch operators, and policy administrators who had contributed to the tactical framework within which the pursuit had been conducted. The fundamental question we had to address, Lieutenant Brown explained in his preliminary report, was whether the tactical decisions made by pursuing officers were consistent with Ohio State Patrol policy, and whether those policies themselves were adequate to prevent similar tragedies in the future. This required us to examine not just individual actions, but the entire systemic approach to high-speed pursuit operations. The review of radio communications revealed that pursuing officers had followed established protocols regarding speed management, civilian safety considerations, and tactical coordination throughout most of the pursuit. However, the investigation also identified several decision points where alternative tactical approaches might have been available, including opportunities to terminate the pursuit or transition to surveillance mode using helicopter support. Agent Stephen Miller, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation special agent assigned to the case, focused his investigation on the suspects' backgrounds and the circumstances surrounding the original carjacking in Cincinnati. His findings revealed significant discrepancies in the initial crime report that had influenced tactical decision-making throughout the pursuit and raised questions about the reliability of intelligence that officers received during dynamic situations. The original carjacking report indicated that the suspects were armed with automatic weapons and had demonstrated extreme violence during the theft, Agent Miller noted in his investigative summary. However, subsequent investigation revealed that the victim had misidentified realistic toy guns as actual firearms, and the level of violence involved was significantly less than initially reported. This intelligence failure contributed to tactical decisions that may not have been necessary, given the actual threat level. The investigation also examined the decision-making process used by supervisory personnel throughout the pursuit, particularly Lieutenant Anderson's authorization to continue the chase, despite increasing risks and changing tactical circumstances. Ohio State Patrol policy required supervisors to continuously evaluate the risk-benefit balance of ongoing pursuits and to terminate chases when risks to public safety exceeded the law enforcement benefits of apprehending the suspects. During his interview with internal affairs investigators, Lieutenant Anderson defended his tactical decisions while acknowledging the tragic outcome that had resulted from the pursuit. Based on the intelligence available at the time, we were dealing with 3 armed suspects who had committed a violent carjacking and were demonstrating complete disregard for public safety, Anderson stated. The decision to continue pursuit was based on the assessment that these individuals posed a significant ongoing threat to public safety if they were allowed to escape. However, the investigation revealed that several opportunities to reassess this tactical calculus had occurred during the pursuit, particularly after the helicopter arrived and provided aerial surveillance capability that could have allowed ground units to maintain contact without direct high-speed pursuit. The failure to transition to surveillance mode once aerial support was available became a key focus of the policy review that followed the incident. Dr. Michelle Clark, a consultant specializing in law enforcement pursuit psychology, was retained by the Attorney General's office to provide expert analysis of the decision-making processes involved in the tragic pursuit. Her evaluation focused on the psychological factors that influence officer behavior during high-stress dynamic situations and the systemic factors that may contribute to pursuit-related tragedies. High-speed pursuits create unique psychological pressures that can affect decision-making in subtle but significant ways, Dr. Clark explained in her expert report. Officers experience elevated stress levels, tunnel vision, and time compression that can impair their ability to continuously reassess tactical situations. Additionally, the pursuit dynamic creates momentum that psychologically favors continuation rather than termination, even when objective risk assessment might suggest alternative approaches. The psychological analysis proved particularly relevant when examining the decision points throughout the pursuit where tactical alternatives might have been available. Dr. Clark's research indicated that officers involved in extended pursuits often develop tunnel vision that focuses their attention on apprehending suspects while reducing their awareness of broader public safety considerations. The tragic outcome of the State Route 256 pursuit prompted a comprehensive review of Ohio State Patrol pursuit policies that would ultimately result in significant changes to training, tactical procedures, and supervisory oversight requirements. The Policy Review Committee, chaired by Colonel Christopher Davis, included representatives from multiple law enforcement agencies, legal experts, and public safety advocates who worked to develop recommendations that would prevent similar tragedies while maintaining effective law enforcement capabilities. The existing Ohio State Patrol pursuit policy, last updated in 2018, provided general guidelines for initiating, continuing, and terminating high-speed chases, but the policy review revealed several areas where more specific guidance was needed. The committee's analysis identified gaps in decision-making criteria, supervisory oversight requirements, and interagency coordination procedures that had contributed to the tragic outcome on State Route 256. Our existing policy framework was generally sound, Colonel Davis explained during public hearings on the policy review. But the Tyler Bennett tragedy revealed that we needed more specific guidance for officers making tactical decisions in dynamic, high-stress situations. We also needed better mechanisms for continuous risk assessment and supervisory intervention throughout extended pursuits. The Policy Review Committee conducted extensive research into pursuit policies used by other state patrol organizations, examining both successful programs that had reduced pursuit-related fatalities and case studies of other tragic outcomes that provided lessons about tactical decision-making and risk management. The committee also consulted with national experts in pursuit management and reviewed academic research on the effectiveness of various tactical approaches. One of the most significant findings of the policy review was the need for more robust supervisory involvement in pursuit operations. The existing policy required supervisory approval for pursuits expected to exceed certain time or distance thresholds, but the review revealed that these thresholds were often exceeded before supervisors could effectively intervene. The new policy framework would require continuous supervisory oversight, with specific decision points for reassessing tactical approaches. The committee also identified the need for better integration of technological capabilities, particularly helicopter support and vehicle tracking systems, that could provide alternatives to traditional ground-based pursuit tactics. The analysis revealed that aerial surveillance capabilities were often underutilized due to deployment delays and coordination challenges, allowing ground pursuits to continue longer than necessary when alternative tactical approaches might have been more appropriate. Captain Amanda Foster, who served on the Policy Review Committee as a representative of field supervisors, emphasized the importance of providing officers with clear decision-making frameworks that could be applied rapidly during dynamic pursuit situations. Officers involved in high-speed pursuits have seconds to make decisions that can have life or death consequences, Captain Foster explained. We needed to provide them with clearer guidelines and better training that would help them make appropriate tactical choices under extreme pressure. The training implications of the policy review were extensive, requiring the development of new curriculum modules focused on pursuit decision-making, risk assessment, and alternative tactical approaches. The Ohio State Patrol Training Academy worked with national experts to develop scenario-based training programs that would help officers practice decision-making skills in simulated high-stress environments. Sergeant Rebecca Turner, the Academy instructor responsible for developing the new pursuit training curriculum, explained that the programs were designed to address both the tactical and psychological aspects of pursuit operations. We needed to help officers understand not just the tactical options available to them, but also the psychological factors that can influence their decision-making during pursuits, Sergeant Turner noted. The training includes extensive scenario work that helps officers practice continuous risk assessment and tactical flexibility. The policy review also addressed the broader question of whether certain types of crimes justified the public safety risks inherent in high-speed pursuits. The committee examined statistical data on pursuit outcomes and developed new guidelines for weighing the seriousness of suspected crimes against the potential risks of pursuit operations, particularly in high-traffic areas or during dangerous road conditions. The legal proceedings resulting from the State Route 256 collision involved both criminal prosecution of the suspects and civil litigation related to the circumstances surrounding Tyler Bennett's death. The complexity of the legal issues required coordination between multiple prosecutors' offices, defense attorneys, and civil rights organizations that were monitoring the case for its potential impact on law enforcement pursuit policies. Brandon Cooper, the 19-year-old driver of the Challenger, was ultimately charged with vehicular homicide, fleeing and eluding police, and multiple traffic violations related to the pursuit and collision. His defense attorney, Lisa Patterson, argued that Cooper's methamphetamine impairment significantly reduced his culpability for the tragic outcome, and that law enforcement tactical decisions had contributed to the circumstances that led to Bennett's death. While we don't dispute that Mr. Cooper was operating the vehicle at the time of the collision, Patterson argued during pretrial hearings, the evidence clearly shows that he was severely impaired by illegal stimulants, and that his judgment and decision-making capacity were significantly compromised. Additionally, the decision by law enforcement to continue a high-speed pursuit through rural areas with oncoming traffic created unnecessarily dangerous conditions that contributed to this tragic outcome. The prosecution, led by Fairfield County Prosecutor Daniel Johnson, maintained that Cooper's drug impairment was a voluntary condition that increased rather than diminished his responsibility for the collision. Johnson's case emphasized Cooper's role in the original carjacking, his decision to flee from law enforcement, and his reckless driving behavior throughout the pursuit that demonstrated a complete disregard for public safety. The defendant made a series of conscious decisions that led directly to Tyler Bennett's death, Prosecutor Johnson argued. He chose to participate in an armed carjacking. He chose to flee from police when confronted with his crimes. And he chose to drive recklessly at extremely high speeds through areas where innocent civilians were at risk. His voluntary drug impairment does not excuse these decisions or reduce his responsibility for their tragic consequences. The two passengers in the Challenger, Austin Hayes and Logan Pierce, were charged with complicity in the original carjacking and various weapons violations, though their injuries from the collision significantly complicated their prosecution. Both men suffered traumatic brain injuries that affected their ability to participate in their own legal defense, requiring extensive medical evaluation and competency hearings to determine their fitness for trial. Dr. Mark Williams, the neurologist who evaluated Hayes and Pierce following their injuries, testified that both men had suffered permanent cognitive impairment as a result of the collision. Both patients exhibit significant deficits in memory, executive function, and impulse control that are consistent with severe traumatic brain injury, Dr. Williams explained during competency hearings. These impairments affect their ability to understand legal proceedings and assist in their own defense. The civil litigation resulting from Bennett's death proved to be equally complex, involving questions about governmental immunity, pursuit policy adequacy, and the allocation of responsibility between law enforcement, agencies, and the criminal suspects. Bennett's family, represented by civil rights attorney Kevin Brown, filed wrongful death lawsuits against the Ohio State Patrol, Fairfield County, and the individual officers involved in the pursuit. Tyler Bennett was an innocent victim who died because law enforcement agencies failed to properly balance public safety considerations against their desire to apprehend suspects in stolen vehicle cases, Attorney Brown argued in court filings. The decision to continue a high-speed pursuit through rural areas with oncoming traffic particularly after helicopter support became available that could have provided alternative tactical options, represented a failure to follow established policies designed to protect public safety. The defense of the civil litigation was coordinated by the Ohio Attorney General's office, which argued that the pursuing officers had followed established policies and that the ultimate responsibility for Bennett's death lay with the criminal suspects who had initiated the dangerous situation. The state's legal team emphasized the challenges faced by officers making tactical decisions in dynamic, high-stress environments where complete information is often unavailable. Our officers were confronted with a situation involving suspects believed to be armed and dangerous who were demonstrating complete disregard for public safety, argued Assistant Attorney General Stephen Miller. The tactical decisions made throughout the pursuit were reasonable, based on the information available at the time, and the tragic outcome resulted from the criminal actions of the suspects rather than any failure in law enforcement procedures. The civil litigation discovery process revealed extensive documentation about pursuit policies, training procedures, and decision-making protocols that became the subject of intense scrutiny by both legal teams and expert witnesses. The depositions of pursuing officers provided detailed insights into their thought processes during the chase, while expert testimony addressed questions about alternative tactical approaches and industry standards for pursuit management. Dr. Jessica Taylor, a nationally recognized expert in law enforcement pursuit operations retained by Bennett's family, testified that the continued ground pursuit after helicopter arrival violated best practices for tactical risk management. Once aerial surveillance became available, established tactical doctrine calls for transitioning to surveillance mode to reduce risks while maintaining contact with suspects, Dr. Taylor explained during her deposition. The decision to continue direct ground pursuit under these circumstances fell below the standard of care expected in modern law enforcement operations. However, the state's expert witness, retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Nicole Adams, provided contrary testimony that emphasized the limitations of helicopter surveillance in rural areas and the ongoing threat posed by armed suspects who remained at large. Aerial surveillance provides valuable intelligence, but it cannot replace ground units for tactical containment and apprehension operations, Adams testified. Given the intelligence about armed suspects and their demonstrated willingness to endanger public safety, maintaining ground pursuit contact was a reasonable tactical decision. The legal proceedings were complicated by revelations about the original carjacking intelligence that had influenced pursuit decisions. The discovery that the suspects had not actually been armed with firearms raised questions about the adequacy of information verification procedures and the reliability of initial crime reports in tactical decision-making processes. The human cost of the State Route 256 tragedy extended far beyond Tyler Bennett's death to encompass the profound impact on his family, the law enforcement officers involved in the pursuit, and the broader community that struggled to understand how a routine traffic stop had resulted in such devastating consequences. The process of healing and rebuilding would require years and would ultimately influence how Ohio approached pursuit operations and community relations. Tyler Bennett had been a beloved elementary school teacher at Lancaster Primary School for 8 years, known for his dedication to his students and his involvement in community volunteer activities. At the time of his death, he was driving to school for an early morning faculty meeting, following the same route he had traveled safely hundreds of times throughout his teaching career. His death represented the loss of a dedicated educator whose impact on his community extended far beyond his classroom responsibilities. Ashley Garcia, Bennett's fiancée of 3 years, became the primary spokesperson for his family during the legal proceedings and policy review process. Her testimony about Bennett's character and community involvement helped personalize the tragedy, and emphasized the human cost of pursuit operations that prioritize suspect apprehension over public safety considerations. Tyler was someone who dedicated his life to helping children learn and grow, Garcia said during her impact statement at Cooper's sentencing hearing. He was driving to work that morning to help prepare for a school assembly about safety. The irony is almost too painful to bear. His death wasn't just a loss for our family, but for all the students whose lives he would have touched and all the good he would have done in the years ahead. The psychological impact on the law enforcement officers directly involved in the pursuit proved to be significant and long-lasting. Trooper Rodriguez, who had initiated the traffic stop that led to the tragic chain of events, experienced severe guilt and stress reactions that required extensive counseling, and ultimately led to his request for transfer to administrative duties within the Ohio State Patrol. Dr. Ashley Garcia, the psychologist who provided counseling services to officers involved in the incident, explained that pursuit-related tragedies create unique psychological challenges for law enforcement personnel. Officers involved in these situations experience a complex mix of emotions, including guilt, anger, frustration, and helplessness, Dr. Garcia noted. They joined law enforcement to protect people, and when their actions, even well-intentioned actions following established procedures, result in civilian casualties, it can fundamentally challenge their sense of professional identity and purpose. Trooper Mitchell, who had served as the secondary pursuit unit, also experienced significant psychological distress following the collision. His witness statement revealed the lasting impact of seeing the collision occur despite his efforts to maintain safe, tactical positioning throughout the chase. "I keep replaying those final seconds in my mind," Mitchell stated during his counseling sessions. "We were trained to balance public safety with apprehension responsibilities, and we thought we were making appropriate tactical decisions throughout the pursuit. But when I saw that collision happen and realized an innocent person had died, it made me question everything I thought I knew about pursuit operations and whether we could have done something different to prevent this tragedy." The impact on the broader law enforcement community extended throughout Ohio and influenced national discussions about pursuit policies and training requirements. The incident became a case study used in training programs across the country, serving as a sobering reminder of the potential consequences when high-speed pursuits intersect with civilian traffic. Captain Michelle Clark, who coordinated the critical incident stress debriefing for all personnel involved in the pursuit, noted that the tragedy affected officers throughout the Ohio State Patrol who had not been directly involved in the incident. "When something like this happens, it impacts everyone in the organization," Captain Clark explained. Officers start second-guessing their own tactical decisions and questioning whether their training and policies are adequate to prevent similar tragedies. It's a natural response, but it can also affect their ability to perform their duties effectively if not properly addressed. The media coverage of the State Route 256 collision generated intense public debate about law enforcement pursuit policies and the balance between apprehending criminal suspects and protecting public safety. The story received extensive coverage from local television stations, newspapers, and radio programs throughout Central Ohio, while also attracting attention from national media outlets that covered law enforcement issues and policy debates. The initial media reports focused primarily on the tragic loss of life and the circumstances surrounding the collision, but coverage quickly evolved to examine broader questions about pursuit policies and accountability. The revelation that the suspects had not actually been armed with real weapons became a particularly significant aspect of the media narrative, raising questions about the tactical decisions that had led to the prolonged pursuit. Jordan Phillips, the investigative reporter for WBNS 10 TV, who provided the most comprehensive coverage of the incident, conducted extensive research into Ohio State Patrol pursuit policies, and interviewed experts from across the country about best practices for managing high-speed chases. Her reporting helped educate the public about the complex tactical and legal considerations involved in pursuit operations while maintaining focus on the human cost of the tragedy. The Tyler Bennett case illustrates the incredibly difficult decisions that law enforcement officers face during pursuit situations. Phillips reported in her series on the incident. Officers must make split-second tactical choices based on incomplete information, while balancing the need to apprehend dangerous criminals against the responsibility to protect innocent civilians. When those decisions result in tragedy, it forces all of us to examine whether our policies and training are adequate to guide officers in these life-and-death situations. The Columbus Dispatch provided editorial coverage that called for comprehensive review of pursuit policies and increased transparency in law enforcement decision-making processes. The newspaper's editorial board argued that the Bennett tragedy demonstrated the need for more restrictive pursuit guidelines and better accountability mechanisms when pursuits result in civilian casualties. Tyler Bennett's death was a preventable tragedy that resulted from policy failures and tactical decisions that prioritized suspect apprehension over public safety, the Dispatch editorial stated. While we support law enforcement efforts to apprehend criminals, we cannot accept pursuit policies that create unnecessary risks for innocent citizens who have the right to travel safely on Ohio's roads. However, the media coverage also included perspectives from law enforcement advocates and police union representatives who argued that restrictive pursuit policies could undermine public safety by allowing dangerous criminals to escape accountability. The Fraternal Order of Police Lodge No. 9 in Columbus issued statements defending the officers involved in the pursuit while acknowledging the tragic outcome. Our officers were faced with an impossible situation involving suspects who had committed violent crimes and were demonstrating complete disregard for public safety, the FOP statement read. While we deeply regret Tyler Bennett's death and extend our condolences to his family, we cannot allow this tragedy to result in policies that would essentially give criminals carte blanche to flee from law enforcement without consequences. The social media response to the incident reflected the polarized nature of public opinion regarding law enforcement accountability and pursuit policies. Facebook groups and Twitter discussions featured heated debates between supporters of law enforcement who emphasized the challenges officers face and critics who argued for more restrictive pursuit guidelines and greater accountability for tragic outcomes. Dr. Casey Morgan, a communications professor at Ohio State University, who studied public opinion regarding law enforcement issues, noted that the Bennett case generated particularly intense responses due to its intersection of multiple controversial topics. This case touches on questions about police accountability, public safety, criminal justice policy, and the appropriate use of force by government agents, Dr. Morgan explained. It's not surprising that it generated such passionate responses from people across the political spectrum. The media attention ultimately influenced the policy review process by maintaining public focus on the need for reform and accountability. The extensive coverage ensured that policymakers and law enforcement administrators could not simply wait for public attention to fade before addressing the systemic issues that had contributed to the tragedy. As the investigation into the State Route 256 tragedy deepened, law enforcement agencies worked to understand the backgrounds and motivations of the three young men whose decisions had initiated the fatal chain of events. The detailed background investigation revealed a complex picture of individuals whose relatively minor criminal histories had not predicted their involvement in the violent carjacking and subsequent high-speed flight that resulted in Tyler Bennett's death. Brandon Cooper, the 19-year-old driver of the stolen Challenger, had grown up in a troubled household in Cincinnati, where domestic violence and substance abuse had created an unstable environment that contributed to his early involvement in criminal activity. His juvenile record included several arrests for theft and drug possession, but nothing in his history suggested a propensity for the violent behavior that characterized the carjacking and pursuit. Social services records obtained during the investigation revealed that Cooper had been removed from his home twice during his childhood due to neglect and abuse, spending several years in foster care before returning to live with relatives. His academic performance had declined significantly during high school, and he had dropped out during his senior year despite showing above-average intelligence on standardized tests. Brandon was a kid who never really had a fair chance, explained Riley Parker, his former foster mother who had cared for him during middle school years. He was bright and could be very charming when he wanted to be, but he had so much anger and hurt from his childhood experiences. We tried to get him counseling and support, but the system just didn't provide the long-term consistency he needed to overcome his early trauma. The investigation revealed that Cooper had begun using methamphetamine regularly during his late teens, a development that his former counselors and social workers identified as a turning point that had accelerated his involvement in more serious criminal activity. The drug use had also contributed to increasingly erratic behavior and poor decision-making that may have influenced his actions during the carjacking and pursuit. Austin Hayes, the 22-year-old passenger, had a somewhat different background that included military service and previous employment in legitimate jobs, but also included struggles with substance abuse that had derailed his attempts to maintain stable housing and employment. Hayes had served briefly in the Army National Guard before receiving a discharge related to drug use, ending what had been a promising opportunity for career development and stability. Family members interviewed during the investigation described Hayes as someone who had struggled to find direction in life, but who had not previously been involved in violent crimes. His criminal history included several arrests for drug possession and minor theft charges, but nothing that suggested he would participate in the type of violent carjacking that had initiated the tragic pursuit. Austin was always trying to get his life together, but he couldn't seem to stay away from drugs and the people who used them, explained his sister Dakota Smith, a nurse who had repeatedly attempted to help him with his addiction issues. He wasn't a violent person by nature, but when he was using drugs, especially methamphetamine, he would make terrible decisions and get involved with dangerous people. I think he got caught up in something that was way beyond what he had ever done before. Logan Pierce, the 20-year-old second passenger, had perhaps the most minor criminal background of the three suspects, with only a few arrests for marijuana possession and underage drinking. His involvement in the carjacking appeared to have been largely circumstantial, as evidence suggested he had been recruited by Cooper and Hayes only hours before the crime occurred. Pierce's family described him as someone who was easily influenced by others, and who often made poor decisions when trying to fit in with groups that he perceived as exciting or adventurous. His mother, Casey Morgan, a single parent who had worked multiple jobs to support her family, expressed devastation about her son's involvement in events that had resulted in such tragic consequences. Logan was never the leader in anything. He was always the follower who went along with whatever his friends wanted to do, Morgan explained during her interview with investigators. I tried to teach him to make good choices and stay away from trouble, but he was so desperate to be accepted by other kids that he would do almost anything they asked. I never imagined that would lead to something like this. The drug screening results from all three suspects revealed significant levels of methamphetamine and other stimulants that would have severely impaired their judgment and increased their aggressiveness during both the carjacking and the subsequent pursuit. The toxicology evidence helped explain their apparently irrational decision-making, but also raised questions about their legal culpability given their voluntary impairment. Dr. Hunter Brooks, the forensic psychiatrist who evaluated all three suspects for the court proceedings, concluded that their substance abuse had contributed significantly to their involvement in the crimes, but did not constitute a legal defense for their actions. All three defendants were severely impaired by illegal stimulants at the time of these offenses, Dr. Brooks reported. However, their impairment was voluntary and appears to have been part of a pattern of escalating drug use that increased their willingness to engage in high-risk criminal behavior. The comprehensive review of the State Route 256 incident resulted in significant institutional changes within the Ohio State Patrol and influenced pursuit policies throughout law enforcement agencies across the state and nation. The reforms addressed training requirements, supervisory oversight procedures, tactical decision-making protocols, and technology integration designed to prevent similar tragedies while maintaining effective law enforcement capabilities. The new Ohio State Patrol pursuit policy, implemented 6 months after the Bennett tragedy, established more restrictive guidelines for initiating and continuing high-speed chases, with specific emphasis on continuous risk assessment and mandatory supervisory oversight at predetermined decision points. The revised policy required pursuing officers to articulate specific justifications for continued pursuit every 5 minutes during chases exceeding certain speed or duration thresholds. Colonel Matthew Wilson, who oversaw the policy implementation, explained that the changes were designed to maintain tactical flexibility while ensuring that risk-benefit assessments were conducted continuously throughout pursuit operations. The new policy doesn't prohibit pursuits, but it requires officers and supervisors to continuously evaluate whether the law enforcement benefits of apprehending suspects justify the risks to public safety. Colonel Wilson noted during training sessions for department personnel. The policy changes included mandatory transition to surveillance mode when helicopter support became available, unless specific tactical circumstances required continued ground pursuit. This requirement addressed one of the key tactical decisions that had been criticized in the Bennett case, and provided clearer guidance for officers facing similar situations in the future. The Ohio State Patrol Training Academy developed extensive new curriculum modules focused on pursuit decision-making that incorporated lessons learned from the Bennett tragedy and other pursuit-related incidents from across the country. The training programs used scenario-based exercises that required officers to practice continuous risk assessment and tactical flexibility under simulated high-stress conditions. Sergeant Daniel Johnson, the Academy instructor who developed much of the new curriculum, emphasized that the training was designed to help officers understand both the tactical options available to them and the psychological factors that can influence decision-making during pursuits. We needed to help officers recognize that the goal of any pursuit is public safety, not just suspect apprehension, Sergeant Johnson explained. Sometimes the best tactical decision is to terminate direct pursuit and rely on other methods to locate and apprehend suspects. The technological improvements implemented as a result of the policy review included enhanced GPS tracking capabilities for patrol vehicles, improved radio communication systems, and better coordination protocols with helicopter units. These technological enhancements were designed to provide pursuing officers and supervisors with better real-time information about pursuit locations, speeds, and tactical options. The integration of predictive technology that could provide officers with information about upcoming road conditions, traffic patterns, and potential hazards became a significant component of the new tactical approach. The system used GPS data and traffic monitoring information to alert pursuing officers about dangerous intersections, construction zones, school areas, and other locations where continued pursuit might pose unacceptable risks to public safety. Captain Mark Williams, who coordinated the technology integration project, noted that the new systems provided officers with information that had never been available during dynamic pursuit situations. Officers involved in high-speed pursuits now have access to real-time information about what lies ahead on their pursuit route, Captain Williams explained. This allows them to make more informed tactical decisions and helps supervisors understand the risks involved in authorizing continued pursuit. The institutional changes also addressed interagency coordination and communication protocols that had been identified as problematic during the Bennett incident investigation. New procedures were established for coordinating pursuits that crossed jurisdictional boundaries and for sharing real-time intelligence about suspect vehicles and tactical situations. The development of new training protocols following the State Route 256 tragedy represented one of the most comprehensive reforms in Ohio State Patrol history, incorporating cutting-edge research in decision-making psychology, tactical operations, and technology integration. The training revolution extended beyond basic pursuit procedures to encompass leadership development, stress management, and community relations components designed to address the broader implications of law enforcement operations. The cornerstone of the new training approach was the implementation of reality-based scenario training that placed officers in simulated pursuit situations requiring them to make complex tactical decisions under time pressure and stress. The scenarios incorporated variables such as weather conditions, traffic density, suspect behavior patterns, and available resources to create training environments that closely replicated real-world operational challenges. Lieutenant Kevin Brown, the training coordinator who oversaw the scenario development, explained that the programs were designed to help officers practice the decision-making, skills that had been identified as crucial during the Bennett incident investigation. We needed to move beyond traditional classroom instruction to provide officers with opportunities to practice tactical decision-making in environments that simulate the stress and time pressure they face during actual pursuits, Lieutenant Brown noted. The scenario training included specific modules focused on the psychological aspects of pursuit operations, addressing the tunnel vision and adrenaline effects that can impair officer judgment during high-stress situations. Officers learned techniques for maintaining situational awareness, conducting continuous risk assessments, and communicating effectively with supervisors and other units during dynamic operations. Dr. Stephen Miller, the police psychology consultant who helped develop the training curriculum, emphasized that the programs were designed to address both conscious and unconscious factors that influence officer behavior during pursuits. High-speed chases create unique psychological environments that can override normal decision-making processes, Dr. Miller explained. Our training helps officers recognize these psychological factors and provides them with tools for maintaining tactical objectivity even under extreme stress. The training programs also incorporated extensive instruction in alternative tactical approaches that could be used instead of traditional direct pursuit methods. Officers learned about surveillance techniques, perimeter establishment, predictive positioning, and technology-assisted tracking that could provide effective suspect apprehension while reducing risks to public safety. The integration of helicopter operations into the training curriculum addressed one of the specific tactical issues identified during the Bennett incident investigation. Officers learned about the capabilities and limitations of aerial support, communication protocols for coordinating with flight crews, and decision-making frameworks for transitioning between ground pursuit and aerial surveillance modes. Pilot Christopher Davis and Tactical Flight Officer Nicole Adams, who represented the Ohio State Patrol Aviation Unit in the training development, emphasized that effective use of helicopter support required understanding of both technological capabilities and tactical coordination procedures. Aerial surveillance can provide tremendous tactical advantages, but only if ground units understand how to integrate helicopter operations into their tactical planning, Pilot Davis explained during instructor training sessions. The supervisory training components addressed the leadership and decision-making responsibilities that had been identified as crucial during the Bennett incident investigation. Supervisors learned about risk assessment methodologies, tactical decision-making frameworks, and communication techniques for managing complex multi-unit operations under stress. The training programs also addressed the community relations implications of pursuit operations, helping officers understand how their tactical decisions affect public trust and community safety. This component included instruction in public communication, media relations, and community engagement techniques designed to maintain transparency and accountability in law enforcement operations. The legal proceedings resulting from the State Route 256 tragedy established several important precedents in Ohio law regarding governmental immunity, pursuit policies, and officer liability that would influence similar cases throughout the state and region. The complex appellate process involved multiple levels of review and attracted attention from legal scholars and civil rights organizations monitoring law enforcement accountability issues. The trial court's initial ruling in the civil litigation brought by Tyler Bennett's family established that Ohio State Patrol officers could be held liable for tactical decisions that violated established policies or fell below professional standards, even when those decisions were made during high-stress emergency situations. The ruling represented a significant departure from previous interpretations of governmental immunity that had generally protected officers from civil liability for tactical decisions made during the course of their duties. Judge Amanda Foster, who presided over the initial civil proceedings, explained her reasoning in a detailed written opinion that became widely cited in legal scholarship and training programs. While law enforcement officers must be afforded reasonable latitude in making tactical decisions under dangerous and dynamic circumstances, this latitude does not extend to decisions that clearly violate established policies designed to protect public safety, Judge Foster wrote. When officers' actions fall below professional standards in ways that directly contribute to civilian casualties, the immunity traditionally afforded to governmental actors must be balanced against the public's right to accountability and compensation. The Ohio Court of Appeals upheld the basic framework of Judge Foster's ruling, but modified several aspects of the liability standard in ways that provided additional protections for officers while maintaining accountability for policy violations. The appellate court's decision emphasized the importance of evaluating officer actions based on the information available at the time decisions were made, rather than with the benefit of hindsight about outcomes. Justice Rebecca Turner, who authored the Court of Appeals opinion, noted that pursuit situations create unique challenges for applying traditional liability standards due to their dynamic nature and the limited time available for decision-making. Courts must be careful to avoid imposing liability based on outcomes rather than the reasonableness of officers' decisions given the information and circumstances they faced at the time, Justice Turner wrote. However, this principle does not excuse decisions that clearly violate established policies or professional standards designed to protect public safety. The criminal prosecution of Brandon Cooper proceeded through multiple appeal levels, as his defense attorneys challenged both the charges and the sentences imposed following his conviction on vehicular homicide and related charges. The appellate process addressed questions about the relationship between voluntary intoxication and criminal liability, as well as the role of law enforcement tactical decisions in contributing to tragic outcomes. The Ohio Supreme Court's eventual review of the case focused primarily on the criminal liability standards applicable to defendants, whose impairment contributed to fatal accidents during police pursuits. The court's decision established that voluntary drug intoxication could not serve as a complete defense to vehicular homicide charges, but could be considered as a mitigating factor during sentencing proceedings. Chief Justice Lisa Patterson authored the majority opinion that balanced the need to hold criminal defendants accountable for their actions while recognizing the complex circumstances that can contribute to pursuit-related tragedies. While voluntary intoxication cannot excuse criminal behavior that results in loss of life, courts must consider all relevant circumstances when determining appropriate sentences, Chief Justice Patterson wrote. This includes consideration of the defendant's impairment, background circumstances, and the role that other factors may have played in creating the dangerous situation that led to tragedy. The legal precedents established through the Bennett case influenced similar litigation throughout Ohio and neighboring states, creating new frameworks for evaluating law enforcement liability and criminal defendant responsibility in pursuit-related incidents. Law schools began incorporating the case into their curricula as an example of the complex legal issues that arise when governmental authority intersects with criminal behavior in ways that result in civilian casualties. Professor Daniel Johnson of Ohio State University's Moritz College of Law, who wrote extensively about the Bennett case's legal implications, noted that the decisions represented an important evolution in balancing law enforcement authority with accountability principles. The Bennett case established that officers can be held liable for tactical decisions that violate established policies, while also recognizing the unique challenges of making decisions under extreme stress, Professor Johnson explained. This balance is crucial for maintaining both effective law enforcement and public trust in government institutions. The process of community healing following the State Route 256 tragedy involved extensive efforts by law enforcement agencies, local government, and civic organizations to rebuild trust and implement reforms that would prevent similar incidents while maintaining effective public safety services. The healing process extended over several years and required sustained commitment from all stakeholders to address the underlying issues that had contributed to the tragic outcome. The Ohio State Patrol initiated a comprehensive community engagement program designed to improve transparency and communication with the public about pursuit policies, tactical procedures, and officer training requirements. The program included regular public meetings where citizens could ask questions about law enforcement operations and provide input about policy development and implementation. Major Michelle Clark, who coordinated the community engagement efforts, explained that the program was designed to rebuild trust through transparency and accountability rather than simply waiting for public attention to fade. We recognized that Tyler Bennett's death had damaged the community's trust in our operations, and we knew that rebuilding that trust would require ongoing effort and genuine commitment to reform, Major Clark noted during one of the public meetings. We wanted the community to understand not just what we were changing, but why those changes were necessary and how they would be implemented. The community engagement program included regular presentations at schools, civic organizations, and community groups where Ohio State Patrol personnel explained the new pursuit policies and training procedures that had been implemented following the Bennett tragedy. These presentations provided opportunities for citizens to ask questions about law enforcement operations and to understand the challenges officers face during high-stress situations. The Lancaster community, where Tyler Bennett had taught, also initiated its own healing and memorial efforts, establishing a scholarship fund in his name and creating educational programs about highway safety and the importance of community involvement in public policy development. The Tyler Bennett Memorial Scholarship provided financial assistance to students pursuing careers in education, while the highway safety programs educated drivers about the risks associated with high-speed travel and the importance of cooperation with law enforcement. Ashley Garcia, Bennett's fiancée, became actively involved in the community healing efforts and served as an advocate for pursuit policy reform throughout Ohio and neighboring states. Her testimony before legislative committees and policy review boards helped maintain focus on the human cost of pursuit-related tragedies, while advocating for reforms that would prevent similar losses. Tyler's death cannot be undone, but it can serve a purpose if it leads to changes that save other lives, Garcia testified during legislative hearings on pursuit policy reform. I don't want any other family to experience the loss and grief that Tyler's death has caused. and I believe that effective policy reforms and training improvements can prevent many of these tragedies without compromising law enforcement effectiveness. The broader law enforcement community in Ohio also engaged in extensive self-examination and reform efforts that extended beyond the specific policies and procedures that had been changed following the Bennett investigation. Professional organizations, training academies, and individual agencies conducted comprehensive reviews of their operations to identify potential improvements and ensure that the lessons learned from the tragedy were implemented throughout the state. The Ohio Association of Chiefs of Police established a special committee focused on pursuit policy development that worked to share best practices and coordinate reform efforts across different agencies and jurisdictions. The committee's work resulted in model policies that smaller agencies could adopt to ensure consistency in tactical approaches and accountability standards. Chief Kevin Brown of the Fairfield County Sheriff's Office, who chaired the committee, emphasized that the reform efforts were designed to improve law enforcement effectiveness as well as public safety. Better policies and training don't just protect civilians, they also protect officers by providing them with clearer guidance and better support for making difficult tactical decisions, Chief Brown explained during a statewide law enforcement conference. When officers have confidence in their training and policies, they can perform their duties more effectively and with greater peace of mind. 5 years after the tragic collision on State Route 256, the impact of Tyler Bennett's death continues to influence law enforcement training, policy development, and community relations throughout Ohio and beyond. The comprehensive reforms implemented following the incident have become a model for other states seeking to balance effective law enforcement with public safety protection, while the ongoing memorial and educational efforts ensure that the lessons learned from the tragedy continue to benefit future generations. The statistical evidence regarding pursuit operations in Ohio demonstrates the effectiveness of the policy reforms and training improvements that were implemented following the Bennett incident. Pursuit-related fatalities involving civilian bystanders decreased by more than 60% in the 5 years following the policy changes, while arrest rates for suspects involved in high-speed chases remained relatively stable, indicating that the reforms improved public safety without significantly compromising law enforcement effectiveness. Colonel Christopher Davis, who continued to oversee the Ohio State Patrol's pursuit operations, noted that the statistical improvements reflected not just policy changes but also cultural shifts within law enforcement agencies that emphasized public safety as the primary consideration in tactical decision-making. The numbers show that we can protect public safety while still effectively apprehending dangerous criminals, Colonel Davis explained during a recent review of the program's effectiveness. The key is ensuring that officers understand that their primary mission is protecting the public, and that sometimes this means accepting that suspects may temporarily escape rather than pursuing them under dangerous conditions. The training programs developed following the Bennett tragedy have been adopted by law enforcement agencies throughout the Midwest and have influenced national standards for pursuit training and policy development. The International Association of Chiefs of Police has incorporated elements of the Ohio training curriculum into their model programs, while several other states have adopted similar policy frameworks for managing high-speed pursuits. The technological improvements implemented as part of the reform effort have also proven effective in providing officers with better real-time information during pursuit operations. The GPS-based hazard warning systems and improved communication capabilities have been credited with preventing several potential tragedies by alerting officers to dangerous road conditions or heavy traffic areas where continued pursuit would pose unacceptable risks. Trooper David Rodriguez, who initiated the traffic stop that led to the Bennett tragedy, eventually returned to road patrol duties after extensive counseling and additional training. His experience with the incident made him a valuable resource for training other officers about the importance of continuous risk assessment and tactical flexibility during pursuit operations. I'll never forget what happened that morning. and I'll never stop wishing that we could have prevented Tyler Bennett's death," Rodriguez reflected during a recent interview about his experience. "But I've also learned that the best way to honor his memory is to use what we learned from that tragedy to help other officers make better decisions in similar situations. The training and policy changes we've implemented won't bring Tyler back, but they might save other lives, and that gives some meaning to a senseless tragedy." The community healing efforts initiated following the Bennett incident have evolved into ongoing programs that continue to strengthen the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve. The regular public meetings and educational programs have become permanent features of Ohio State Patrol operations, providing ongoing opportunities for citizen input and maintaining transparency about law enforcement policies and procedures. Ashley Garcia continues her advocacy work for pursuit policy reform and has become a nationally recognized speaker on issues related to law enforcement accountability and traffic safety. Her testimony before legislative committees and policy review boards has influenced reform efforts in more than a dozen states, while her educational presentations at law enforcement training academies have helped thousands of officers understand the human cost of tactical decisions made during high-stress situations. Tyler's death taught all of us that every tactical decision has human consequences that extend far beyond the immediate situation, Garcia explained during a recent speaking engagement at the FBI National Academy. When officers understand that their decisions affect real people with families, dreams, and contributions to make to their communities, it changes how they think about risk assessment and tactical priorities. That's the legacy I want Tyler's death to leave. Better decision-making that protects everyone involved in these dangerous situations. The Tyler Bennett Memorial Scholarship has provided educational assistance to more than 50 students pursuing careers in education, ensuring that his commitment to helping young people learn and grow continues to have impact long after his death. The recipients of the scholarship often speak about how Bennett's example has influenced their own career goals and commitment to serving their communities. The ongoing research and policy development inspired by the Bennett case continues to influence law enforcement practices throughout the United States. Academic institutions, professional organizations, and government agencies regularly cite the case as an example of how tragic incidents can be transformed into positive changes that improve both law enforcement effectiveness and public safety. Dr. Hunter Brooks, the researcher who has conducted the most comprehensive study of the Bennett case's impact on law enforcement practices, noted that the incident demonstrates both the potential dangers of high-speed pursuits and the possibility of implementing effective reforms that address those dangers. The Bennett tragedy shows us that law enforcement agencies can learn from their mistakes and implement changes that prevent similar tragedies without compromising their ability to protect the public, Dr. Brooks concluded in his recent published research. The key is having the courage to honestly examine what went wrong and the commitment to make the difficult changes necessary to do better in the future. Today, as Ohio State Patrol officers begin their shifts across the state, many carry reminder cards that include Tyler Bennett's photograph and a brief summary of the lessons learned from the State Route 256 tragedy. The cards serve as a constant reminder that their tactical decisions have human consequences and that their primary mission is protecting the public they serve. The stretch of State Route 256 where the collision occurred now features a roadside memorial that honors Tyler Bennett's memory, while providing information about highway safety and the importance of cooperation between law enforcement and the community. The memorial serves as a permanent reminder of the human cost of high-speed pursuits, while also recognizing the positive changes that have resulted from the tragedy. In the end, the legacy of the State Route 256 incident stands as a testament to the possibility of transforming tragedy into positive change through honest examination, comprehensive reform, and sustained commitment to improvement. While Tyler Bennett's death cannot be undone, the reforms implemented in response to his loss have undoubtedly saved other lives and will continue to protect both law enforcement officers and the communities they serve for years to come. The case serves as a permanent reminder that effective law enforcement requires not just courage and dedication, but also wisdom, humility, and the willingness to continuously learn and improve. It demonstrates that the thin blue line between order and chaos is maintained not just by individual heroism, but by institutional commitment to excellence, accountability, and the protection of all members of the community. For the families, officers, and communities affected by the State Route 256 tragedy, the healing process continues. But their experience has created a legacy of reform and improvement that honors Tyler Bennett's memory, while working to ensure that similar tragedies become increasingly rare through better training, policies, and decision-making processes that prioritize public safety above all other considerations.